meeting of Lift to order. It is Thursday, November 8th, 2018 at 6:31. And we will start with the roll call. Carol Brezjak.
Here.
Cindy Christensen.
Here.
Jason Henderson. Here. William Hoppy.
Here.
Joseph Areno.
Here.
Jack Rychecki.
Here.
And Kevin Seiler is present. Also joining us this evening is Mr. Kemp. Thank you.
Thank you.
Also like to welcome our neighbors who have joined us either in person or online. Next thing is the approval of the agenda. Do you have a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next we have the minutes from our last meeting of October 11th. Do I have a motion to move the minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of accepting the minutes as provided, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. So now we're at the first public comment. We invite anybody from the public to come forward to share any thoughts, concerns, questions that they may have. Again, they are limited to, we ask them to limit their comments to 3 minutes. And when they begin, to state their name for the record. Anybody wish to come forward?
My name is Linda Knufike from the 4th District. Tonight I'm reviewing the Bellevue Corridor map and the urban renewal boundaries. So if you look at the slide from the Columbine Square Urban Renewal Plan on page 5, it shows the properties approved by City Council on February 17, 2015. LIFT's job is to implement the urban renewal plan with the boundaries as shown here. If you want to change or expand the boundaries, you have to amend the existing plan or create a new urban renewal plan, and it must go to an election. The second slide shows the actual Bellevue Corridor Plan from the Arapahoe County's database. The boundary of Bellevue Corridor is Santa Fe to the east and Lowell on the west. The pink is Littleton, and the Inglewood is displayed in blue up kind of top to in the screen. So the triangle on the left-hand side of the map shows the Columbine Urban Renewal area, and then this area here is a residential area not on the Urban Renewal Plan. And this is also, all these properties are in the Urban Renewal Plan. If we move over here to the Home Depot across Federal, you can see that this Home Depot and these two plans, they were surveyed in the condition survey, and in the condition survey, they decided not to include them in the final Columbine Square Urban Renewal Plan. So again, these are the only two areas, and this area is not included in the plan. So if we go to, and this is the King Soopers up here, and this is also Inglewood, and that's housing. So I'm not sure what the impacts are to the corridor that exists. And then also we have Centennial Square up top and Riverside Downs over to the right. So these properties are not in the urban renewal area, and I'm not sure whether you can expend urban renewal funds if the properties are not specifically listed in the urban renewal plan. At the very end, it tells you the AIN or property numbers from the county, and those are there. So, so tonight, the architect may present a potential new road in the Columbine Square area over here. So this may be appropriate for LIFT to consider it because it falls into the urban renewal law and the Columbine Square urban renewal plan, despite the fact that the plan doesn't have specific projects attached to the plan, which the law requires. The proposal makes me ask several questions on how the property will be purchased to build the road. Will the developer give the property to the city? There's a lot of questions, and legal agreements need to be made. And then state law and the Columbine Square Urban Renewal Plan specifically allows you to do things like improve speeds, drainage, parking facades, underground utility safety improvements to the properties in the Urban Renewal Plan. Again, Centennial Square, Home Depot, and Riverside Downs are properties not in the Urban Renewal Plan, and as a result, you can't use urban renewal funds for the Columbine Square Urban Renewal Plans. Thank you.
Are there any others who wish to come forward and make any comments? Okay.
Hi, Jeannie Erickson. I live in District 1. I have a few comments tonight regarding LIFT finances. Does LIFT have enough money to, number one, repay any bonds you may float? Number two, pay for attorneys. Number three, pay for a bond attorney. Number four, pay for an executive director. Create a new urban renewal area, including commissioning a condition survey, writing a new urban renewal plan to include other properties on Bellevue, have public comment, which the law requires, pay for an election to revise the urban renewal area. The presentation that you're going to have at your study session tonight regarding the Bellevue corridor, I already saw that at the City Council study session a month ago. And they paint a pretty picture, but there are many, many questions regarding that presentation. For one thing, half of Bellevue is in Inglewood. I would like to know how that is going to affect any urban renewal money spent. Are we going to make it pretty on one side and then leave the Inglewood side the way it is? Also, I'm wondering how money from urban renewal can be used all the way across that Bellevue corridor when it's not all urban renewal properties. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else wish to come forward at this time?
Hi, I am Pam Kaplan. I live in District 1, a block and a half from here. So I also saw the October 9th study session of the City Council where this presentation, I believe similar or the same, was made. My comment is that it's not founded on anything. It is pretty pictures, as Jeannie so concisely described. It is nothing more. There is no analysis by the city that shows that this concept could work. I'm also going to point out that Bellevue means beautiful view. And what they talked about is creating a room, in other words, kind of a line of buildings right up to the right-of-way of a certain height that I think would pretty much block everybody's view there. And to me, that's not Bellevue. The advantage of Colorado is that we have a beautiful sky, we have great sunsets, we have mountains there, and we can see. In the mid-century modern that exists on Littleton Boulevard and Bellevue, and some downtown, Geneva Village is that, gives us some of that space and view. And that we should preserve. On the north side of Littleton, we should preserve the authenticity of that character of development. You know, we have lots of square miles to the south that we can develop in this modern way. But Bellevue should not be remade in the fashion that's current at this time or to this kind of concept. We don't have buy-in from the community for that. Urban renewal started in 2013, and I've talked to a lot of people there. I've carried a lot of flyers for various reasons. And I won't say that there aren't some people who would like it, but pretty much overall, most people don't like this kind of plan. They like the character of the neighborhood as it is now. So there isn't buy-in by the community, and in fact, the third issue that was brought up was, this is a panic, this is a crisis. The Pell is coming up, and we've got to have something passed for the Pell. Well, for one thing, what's the management failure that broke here? Because it's a fundamental one, and it is unacceptable. The Pell's been around for 2 years. Any good manager could say, what do we need to feed into it, and have done this before. This is a manufactured crisis. It is not real. We have plans now, and we can base our input to the Pell on them. The justification for this is, I could say manufactured. I don't have evidence of that, but it sure is weak. So where's the community buy-in? I know that people don't want this kind of plan. It is a plan that was developed behind the scenes by very few people. Probably, the mayor actually said, for developers and property owners who want to do certain things. It's their job to serve all of the people,
Thank you, Pam.
not just a few.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, we will close this for public comment. Ms. Hooten is not here tonight. She was unable to put together our financial report for this month, so we do not have one this month. So next item are committee reports. The first item is the update on the attorney search, and I will turn this over gladly to Joe to share the latest update.
Well, the decision on Moy White was made for us. They decided to withdraw their application. I spoke at length with them, trying to understand why, and also to get an idea of a way that we can move forward. And they went back to their team, looked at what our expectations and needs were and what their resources were, and while it would be the norm for any firm to do the upfront research and study to get up to speed on certain issues, they perceived that, that's an upfront investment of time. Sure. And their perception was that they'd make that investment right now, but there wasn't really anything on the horizon, which is a perfectly reasonable business decision as far as I'm concerned from their view. They did say that if any needs were imminent, they would love to be available to us, and that would make things a little bit different. I'm not aware of any imminent needs other than if we did happen to be renegotiating a loan agreement with the city, which I've heard mentioned. That would be the most immediate need, I would imagine. So with that, I do have two questions, and I don't know if anybody here can answer them. Maybe Mr. Kemp is the best bet. But the first one is if there were an imminent need and we didn't have counsel yet. So for example, we were prepared to discuss the loan agreement. What means do we have to retain counsel if we were in that sort of a situation and didn't quite have time for the entire RFP process? What's an appropriate approach to take? I just kind of want to understand, would we be in a bind?
Because the NIF board is a separate political subdivision, you would not be required to go through the city's process. If you needed to do it on a more expedited basis, that could be done. Because it's just important to know that this is a separate political subdivision from the city. So things such as the city charter don't apply to you. It's because you're a separate political subdivision.
Okay, and that's kind of the answer I was imagining. But so for me, it's good to know that if the need were imminent, we would not be up a creek without a paddle. And then I did have a conversation with them, and they spoke to their marketing department about what approaches to take with an RFP going forward. And their feedback was a lot of the smaller firms that would deal in this area are disinclined to respond to big comprehensive RFPs because of the work involved in that and their concept. So what I would propose is we're not in a hurry, so I might revise the RFP and simplify it quite a bit. Because I think what we worked with in the beginning was something that's largely it's for developers, and Jay broke it down quite a bit and simplified it quite a bit, and I thank him for that task because I didn't want to do it.
But there's a long way to go. No, I agree.
We could probably go even more and simplify it even more to really down to the basics, where we're talking about your basic experience and your fee structure. And I think if we are getting a firm that has experience in it, that firm's experience and reputation would speak for itself in ways that explore that in the interview. So I might suggest simplifying the RFP and then sending it out again to different practice.
So what does I would kind of propose that maybe a different tack on this, where, because, it'll be an investment to advertise it again or so forth like that. Does it make sense that we target 3 or 4 firms and say, here's what we need? Can you come to the table? Are you willing to come to the table? Tell us what your fee structure is, what you bring. I'm sure Mr. Kemp can advise on some firms that he would recommend. I think you indicated that the firm we were talking to had given you some couple of recommendations. And we just reach out to them and solicit a more simplified package instead of going through that process, expending, putting out the money, and just be more targeted with, we hear you're good at this.
I think that's appropriate, especially in as much as the city's process is not a requirement that we have to follow.
Right.
I mean, obviously, I would like to strive for as much transparency as possible, and everybody would know who we're contacting. And
What we could do is, since we've got the website, to the point where we could put something on there, if you wanted to, at least put, we have a section for news, or we have all kinds of sections we could use, where you could actually put a brief RFP or a brief statement on there, or what we're looking for. And that would give it just a little bit more, that you're actually looking for it, and, maybe somebody would see it and they would say, hey, maybe we want to take a look at this.
And if you have a link to something and we communicate with a firm that isn't interested, I'm sure that they would be very happy to pass it on to other possibilities. So.
It's just an easy and a cheap way to kind of get it out a little bit broader.
Jack?
Oh, yes, thank you. I have some different thoughts. Okay. Because when we get to my presentation and Carol's presentation, we got a lot of questions. Mm-hmm. I think we're taking the wrong approach. And I hate spending public money needlessly. Mm-hmm. But if you're going to get an attorney, you need a retainer. And if you're going to get what we need for our application process, we need a retainer. I think we had better start looking at, if we'd given Moy White a retainer or offered one, they could put the upfront work that's necessary into it. Now, I'm not saying that that's what we need to do. I'm just saying that's the way I looked at it. I'm looking at it on the other hand, because what you're going to find out in our presentation is we're going to get these applications in. Who's going to process them? Who's going to accept it? Who's going to do the analysis? And if we don't have somebody ready to go, then it's going to take us a while to get it. And the developer's not going to really like us just spinning our wheels. And we need an attorney. There's no two ways about it. And I just don't think we should wait. But I'm not saying that offering a retainer to Moy White, if that's what we want, is what it is. But, we're dealing with a business here. We need to be frugal with our money, but on the other hand, we do have a pot of money, and we need to spend it in an appropriate manner so that we can do our business. And a retainer to professional firms is not unheard of. So that's my thought.
The other side of that is that generally when you provide a retainer, you anticipate work being done in the short run. You don't just give it to them to put it into an escrow account and let it sit in the law firm's escrow account instead of ours. I think we ought to retain control of our own money until it needs to go elsewhere. What we could do in lieu of that, Jack, I think, is offer the opportunity for a retainer should something become necessary for them to do the work. And we could, there are methods when you pay legal law firms to put that in an escrow account that's controlled by mutual release. But I don't favor releasing our money so that we don't have any control over it. I don't think that's in the public interest. So we have to be very careful with that.
However, we are going to have something coming up shortly. We do know that we're going to have to negotiate a loan with the city. But I don't think a law firm is the one we want to do the negotiations. However, we need the law firm to say, yep, everything's legal and you're good to go. And we didn't miss anything.
And maybe we need to examine what that negotiation would require. If it's simply a sliding of due dates, or, I mean, city council has called for this money, so, and they did vote to allow urban renewal to continue, and that's in their best interest and the best interest of our citizens. So by extension, you would think it's in the best interest of city council not to call all that money at one time, because that is contrary to what they ask us to do, which is the mission of urban renewal. So I think it takes some thought. I'm not saying that your thought's totally out of line, but I don't think we should haphazardly put an escrow fund or put our money out of our own funds that we're not able to control for our own purposes.
Mr. Kemp, you look like you have a
Well,
thought.
I'm going to sort of weigh in from a lawyer's perspective on this. Right now, I see two items that this board likely is going to have to deal with where I will have a conflict. One is going to be the discussions on the loan agreement, and I expect that city council at some point will want to direct me to have those discussions. And obviously, if I'm saying city council, I won't be representing left. The other will be if this board and city council want to talk about an intergovernmental agreement, which is authorized by the statutes as it pertains to the Bellevue corridor. Quite honestly, talking with the planning folks, the economic development folks, we have not had anyone make any approaches to the city about doing an urban renewal project in the urban renewal plan area. Doesn't mean that they won't. It just means that right now, we have to keep in mind what this entity is. We're a conduit financing entity. We're an alternative to the commercial financing that is out there. And right now, a number of developers are very well equipped to you simply go out in the conventional market and obtain that financing. Now, if the Fed keeps raising interest, the discount rate, that could change in a couple years. But at the moment, and then this is fairly true elsewhere, you're not seeing a whole lot of new urban renewal projects just because the conventional financing market of a developer is fairly strong, is able to do that. But I do see those two things as something where during the course of this upcoming year, I could see this board needing to have separate counsel. I don't think it's going to be a lot of effort because I suspect at the end of the day, the board and the city council are probably going to be fairly well aligned. It's just that ethically, I can't wear two hats. And but those are the two things I do see in the course of this year that could come up.
That begets the point, which the public was talking about. How far of a reach can we have with the money that we are collecting from the Columbine Square area, and how can that be transferred? And that is one thing I would really like to have our independent counsel guide us on. Make sure we don't make any missteps. We have a fiduciary responsibility to handle the public's money correctly.
Well, I don't think anybody on the board is disagreeing with you. It's just, and want to bring the discussion back to the matter at hand. I think we all recognize that at some point in time, and it may be sooner than more than later, that we need some legal representation, whether it be reviewing potential loan documents, interagency agreement, if we move forward with some sort of matching grant program with businesses in the area, just reviewing that to making sure we're doing that correctly. There's a lot of different things going on, and I think it's been prudent that we move forward in trying to retain counsel. This option, the direction we're going didn't work out, so what's our plan B? Again, I think I'm not comfortable, being someone who's retained a lawyer in the past, gave them retainage, didn't use it all, and that was a very expensive, thing, because that's part of it, as I understand it. Once they have control of the money, it's theirs, and if you don't spend it, you lose it. That's not in the best interest of us or the citizens of the community. Again, so I go back to what I would like to see is that Jason and Joe come up with a list of 4 or 5 firms that may be small firms that are specialized in this area that did not respond because they just didn't have the resources to respond to that. Slim down the RFP, basically boil it down to what we're really looking for, and ask them, hey, can you give us cost proposals? Would you, what in order to enter an agreement with us, what would be your terms? And part of it is a retainage. Then we find that out and we have that discussion and figure out if that's something we want to do.
Mr. Chairman, I was just thinking it might be just a matter of timing. We talk to these people and you go, okay, retainer will be on the table, but they don't start working, we don't start triggering them until the timing is right, and then I probably that structure will be the one that makes sense actually when that time comes. As I hear everybody talking, I think that's sort of where we're all landing. That's money that's going to need to be spent, maybe sooner rather than later. But when it happens.
Let me ask the lawyers in the room: is there such a thing as a?
He's the one with the licensed lawyer in the state.
Is there such a thing as a letter of intent with a law firm where you could say, we intend to hire you should the need arise. Here's what the retainer arrangement will be. We have funds exhibited on our financial statement, and should we've reached this agreement to move forward.
It's not binding.
Of course it's not binding, but it's a letter of intent.
Yep.
So all the pieces are in place that you can still pre-negotiate all those pieces. And
Certainly do that. The biggest issue for the law firm is once they've done that, they may then have conflicts with anyone who may be doing business with us, but frankly, this is not a very likely thing. This is not an urban renewal authority that has 30 projects, and you could have a conflict list of 300 or 400 people. We have no projects. Essentially, the only conflicts are going to be people on this board and myself, and that's a pretty confined group.
That's a good idea.
Yes.
There's only 5 or 6 firms that deal with urban renewal, and they're not going to be local firms. They may be some independent. But one of the things that Joseph said, you went to the training and talked to Carolyn White, who's part of a very large firm and has their fingerprint on lots of urban renewal plans and authorities. She wasn't even aware of the RFP. So I think the targeted sending, and we target the firms that do urban renewal, and we might get somewhere. I think we need one sooner than later, and maybe it's because of the work that we've done that I'm there. Of course, I've been fussing for this for over a year, that there's a whole lot of work that has to be done before we even sit down with anyone. And if we wait for someone to walk in the room, we're not going to be able to talk to them because we haven't done the work. So I think we need one sooner than later. I like the slim down process and the target, but let's target the firms that we know they do it.
That's what I'm
I think that's the
suggesting.
quickest route is if you're even calling it an RFP, but a letter that says this is what we're looking for, these are the questions we have for you, are you interested?
Just a query.
Exactly.
Yeah. So another run at it is what.
And that process would be much quicker than the 3-4 month process we had lined up before.
Do we want to review the slim down and the potential firms, or do we want to trust Joe and Jason to move forward with this, to expedite this?
I think we can expedite this, and then this is just me talking, but I think I think we can expedite the process and then bring back to you candidates just like before. Just like if we were hiring somebody,
Yeah, I would imagine that Jay and I could have some written correspondence, and then the two of us could hop on a call with the firm, and then schedule a time for final decisions with the board.
I think that works well.
feel look at that?
Okay. All right.
Can I just, for the minutes here, trying to keep up with you guys. Are you going to try to have candidates at our next meeting, or do we have any dates or timelines set up around this?
It would be nice if we did.
I would imagine it's possible.
I think,
I'll put possible.
and then, they'll let us know and we'll get it on the agenda.
Okay.
And then we would, if that's potential, everybody knows, we would have a study session immediately following that meeting, so we could talk to those potential firms, yes.
Probably should have a motion on this action.
Okay, would you like to?
You're asking a person with dementia to come up with something like this? Come on. No, I move that the search for legal counsel be made by the subcommittee and with targeted solicitations. Interviews will be conducted, preliminary interviews and correspondence will be conducted by said subcommittee and brought back with their recommendations to the board as a whole for final decision for procurement. Is that?
I might have, I don't know, the point of order, how do I?
Well, we'd have to second.
Somebody needs a second, and then you can amend it all you
do
want.
that.
I'm not an attorney, so you gotta do this.
Can we discuss what the motion might look like and then just get one motion on the floor with?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that we do want to bring it back, but we'd like to give you guys an opportunity to do another interview. I think a group interview wouldn't hurt.
Well, we're talking to be brought back at the earliest meeting, a study session that could be scheduled.
Yeah.
And the potential would be.
Did I screw you up? I'm sorry, Jack.
That's what I wanted.
Mr. Chair,
got a motion
you
on
really
the
need to
floor.
have a second on the
Let's have a
motion
second.
before you discuss. Has there been second? I did not hear a second.
We have a second?
Why don't we let it die and start over?
Right.
Yeah, you could. do you wanna
Okay,
withdraw?
back it up, erase all that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Mr. Hopping knows more than I do.
Well, no, I'm just saying maybe it'd be appropriate for
See, I left it
you
open.
to withdraw the
restate
motion
if
for
you
now or
Yeah.
restate.
Well,
It
it just died, lack of
Yeah,
second.
there's no second, so you're fine.
died.
Okay. Let me try.
So,
I move that we charge the subcommittee with reviewing our application process, slimming it down in a way that will solicit not such a lengthy process from them. And you call through responses, determine what candidates will come before the group as a whole for an interview, and that you target your RFP or the letter of, what do we call it? Search letter to firms that specialize in urban renewal.
I'll second that. And I want you to write down everything you just said.
I'm going to have to listen to the tape. I hate making motions for that reason.
any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next on the committee report agenda is application documents report, and I will turn it over to Jack and Carol.
Well, our subcommittee consists of Carol and Joe and me, but unfortunately, Doreen couldn't attend the meeting that Carol and I had. This document that you find that's got draft and it's in color is the result of the discussions we had and the questions we had. I'll go through it briefly because everyone here is far more literate than I, and you can read it. But basically what I've done with this document is take right out of our book the application process, and I've tried to make it more robust in terms of what our research was to other urban renewal areas and our discussions and our experiences, and trying to, in one way, simplify the process, and in another way, give us enough flexibility to ask for all kinds of documents, because the bottom line is this. The project developer comes to us, or the applicant, we don't know exactly what the character and nature of that applicant is, and the financial structure, whatever else. And when you start, if you say that we want these documents, problem is that they may not be the right documents. You really need to customize what you're asking for various entities. It mostly goes to the organizational structure and the financial structure. You know, the construction documents, they're construction documents, but the other stuff is kind of flexible. So I call your attention to a lot of red stuff that I put in there. And tried to add some stuff, make sure that terms of defined terms like project developer, you know, are consistent, redevelopment stuff. That's all housekeeping. The real gist of this thing is, and sorry the pages aren't numbered. This is an 11th hour thing, and I'm going to tell you that because I did this at 11 o'clock last night.
A true 11th hour.
And then Carol will step in because she's got an 11 hour and 45 minute thing with her comments back to me. But when you look at the objectives, I tried to write what the objective is of our analysis. But you can see above that, in brackets, here's the real question. We're asking for a preliminary application. Who will accept the documents on behalf of LIFT with the further task of completing a preliminary assessment and recommendations to the LIFT board? That is, should we go ahead? Who's going to do that? So we've got these questions sprinkled throughout there, and they're in purple in this deal. But the objectives are, I just put in there, based on a lot of experience dealing with this, what kind of things we could be asking for. If you look at various other urban renewals, they spell it out. But, for example, you get to Golden and they're asking tell us about your mezzanine loans. First of all, these people may not have mezzanine loans. And by the way, a mezzanine loan is one where you get debt that can be converted to equity. So, it's going to depend on the debt structure. All these documents here would be something that a banker might want in various formats in order to underwrite a loan. Well, we're not underwriting a loan per se, even though we're really underwriting a partnership. And we're going to grant money on a non-recourse basis to the developer and for whatever need he needs to make the gap financing in the project. So that's a list. And so you can go through the list and take a look at that. The next question is, who will request, analyze, and interact with the applicant for additional information and clarifications, investigate public funding market conditions, and report to LIFT board with findings and recommendations? So we have all this information. We want to keep going forward? Okay, so now we know what the developer needs in terms of money. Can we raise it based on this? And by knowing so you need somebody that is kind of a postmaster to move things around and manage the consultants. You need consultants that know about taxes and appraisals and construction and insurance and the public debt market. Just a whole host of things that are going on. And is that one individual that we can hire? I doubt it. But is it a firm like CRE or Cushman Wakefield? They probably have the resources to do it, but we want to make sure that they aren't doing work for the developer because we don't want a conflict of interest. So the question is, who will do this? And I think that's a very important question. And our, the next big thing is I put in items, and you're gonna see things like character, capital, and capacity. There are the 3 C's of credit analysis. And character is one. Who are you that wants to borrow the money from us? Well, in this case, who are you that wants us to grant you funds? Number 2, capacity, capital and capacity is how much money do you have now? And how much money will you have in the future? Sure, you're not paying us back, but you're gonna pay us back because you're gonna finish the project. And the project itself will be so good and so wonderful, so leased up or so sold that the property taxes will go up and we're gonna have all this incremental money. And we can afford to pay back the bonds that we issued in order to give you the grant. So these things are very important, and particularly, who are you doing business with? My friends in the banking industry tell me that we're more likely to get a limited liability corporation coming in as our borrower right now. It's because of the litigious nature of the construction industry right now. And it's the vehicle that seems to make the most sense. You might have the general partner being a corporation. You might have it being another limited partnership. Very unlikely it'll be an individual, but you could. But we still need to know who's behind all this, who's behind all these layers of stuff, and how these, are there any entities that have been in business for at least 3 years that we can talk to, and their references and all that. It's a lot of footwork for somebody who's going to do that. There could be other third-party, not lenders, but other grantors, like CHAFA, because maybe there's going to be a component, we want a component for affordable housing. Maybe CHAFA's getting a grant. Maybe they're getting a grant for whatever else. So we got to understand what all those restrictions are and all this. So it's more than just looking at the appraised value and looking at the incremental taxes that we can collect. It's looking at them with the eye that, okay, how does all these pieces fit together so that do we want to do business with this entity, the project developer? And do we ourselves, as a board, based upon the information we have the financial capacity to issue bonds and repay them? So you can look through, and I ask you to take a look through all of this stuff, because what I tried to do was, with the red lines in here, call attention to certain things that we want, but still be flexible. Go to the next part, fees and expenses. Question is, who will bill, collect, and account for the fees and make payments to the consultants? We need somebody to do that. I don't think the city is going to do that for us. And, what I'm proposing is, in the past, we've had a $60,000 upfront fee. What at least I am proposing is that we reduce that to kind of like an ante. Throw $10,000 on the table. Could be a sign to when we finally figure out how much money it's going to cost to do our analysis for us. And if we haven't, used that money as kind of a preliminary assessment. But if there's anything left, just put it back into the deal. And then, then they have to pay as we go with all the fees and stuff. And then they're going to have to pay for the election. I put that in here too. So, because other entities don't have that. Pay the fee for it. Somebody's got to pay for it. And one thing I did throw in here is because of the public interest, typically payment performance bonds, completion bonds are required. Not saying for the entire project, but at least for the part we have to finance, are going to do the reimbursement on it. Because we're probably going to do public utilities, things like that, they're not lienable. We want to make sure people get paid. Or we could ask for a letter of credit from the developer. Not too many changes. Most of it is trying to be as flexible and be as consistent in their language as possible. So I offer this for you to take a look at, chew on for the next month. Give me your comments. I think Carol has a few because she's got blue in here in my version, so you don't have that yet. So go ahead, Carol.
Well, I'm wondering, for process, if you want to just collect all the comments at one time, rather than going through what I have, and we could, if we could get the committee to send their comments to us, and then we can sit down again with the comments and incorporate what we are sure about, question mark, what we think the group needs to discuss, and bring it back.
What was the, Carol, what was the were you going to make a presentation on a different document?
Well, no, this is what we have. I have, kind of, for me in my head, a next step to this. This is a document that outlines legally what we need to do when we deal with an applicant. But there's a whole other set of issues that the applicant needs to be aware of, and they're more Resolution 88, the election, impact report, the modification and what that triggers.
Yeah.
So, those kinds of things, I think anybody who's coming to talk to us needs to know that it's not this set of hurdles that have to be crossed. There's another avenue that has to be navigated to get to the finish line. And I think we need to write up that as well and all understand it. Because to me, it's just as important, because they could go through all of this and then go, the first step out of the gate gets shut down, and they're going to wonder why we didn't tell them. And why did they go through all of this without them knowing the other, I guess, administrative kinds of things that they're going to have to deal with that are beyond the urban renewal law.
See, she's looking at the language, and I'm looking more at who's going to do this work. So I think our fork has two prongs. One, let's get the language correct and the procedures correct. And then number two, basically, my point is, just like we're on a search for legal counsel, I think we ought to be on a search for an entity or entities that can be our gatekeeper, kind of act like an executive director, but perhaps on a part-time basis. And if we have something, and perhaps that gatekeeper also will have the resources in the back room or the expertise to do part of the analysis for us and make recommendations, particularly on the preliminary basis. Because the in-depth studies, we certainly, we're going to get a bunch of other documents, and I just want to make sure we don't have any conflicts of interest at all.
What's the likelihood that an office, a legal office that really has a lot of depth and experience in urban renewal would have people on their team that would do this kind of thing for us?
I think it's possible, but I imagine that the fees that you're paying to a law firm are higher than you would be paying to.
Okay.
Yeah.
So almost sounds like, a lot of these are functions of an executive director.
Yeah.
And I like your idea, the $10,000 fee rather than what we've talked about in the past, which is like 50 or 60,000 or whatever, and you tier it, okay, so we've gone through this initial hurdle. Now we need more to get to the next step, but they're not committed. It's an outfit for them. But it's almost like, and I think you're right, we need to all digest this, but we need to have an executive director firm or whatever that we can go to. And I don't know what that looks like, but we need somebody who understands what they're doing. I don't think any of us are equipped to, or wouldn't want to take on at least the moral liability of trying to make some of these decisions.
I mean, it's also a time commitment.
Absolutely, it's a time commitment, and you gotta know what you're doing.
Right.
You know, there are some of these areas that we could piece together. I mean,
Yeah.
I do appraisals and market studies, I'd be fine in that, but the rest of it, you know, it'd be kind of like, who do you go to? So, you know, and I think we need somebody to coordinate that, so that would be initial feedback, but I think maybe at this point, we take this and go digest it, come back with, is this a study session item, Kevin, or how do we work it?
It probably should be, where we take some time to digest this, give Carol and Jack some time to, see, is there any such animal of a firm that does this? I mean, this urban, if we still had all 4 urban renewal areas, it would make sense to go back to look at bringing on the executive director part-time to manage it. With just the one area, is it cost effective, to do that? Or do we get somebody that's going to give, I think that's part of the criticism we had previously, before any of us were on the board, with the executive director from 3 or 4 years ago, that he may not have devoted or done his due diligence for the board. So we could run into that kind of scenario again, and I don't think that's fair to the city or to the board. So I think we could put this on the agenda for a study session after the next meeting, and give this some time for some more research and maybe some feedback. As we're sitting here talking about it, I probably will reach out to Maureen again and say, are you aware of other municipalities that have a small urban renewal area with limited resources? How do they manage something like this?
Is it possible you find, bearing in mind everything that Bill said about how overwhelming some of these choices would be for those of us who are laymen, such as myself, but is it possible these are handled by ad hoc committees? I mean, could you handle this stuff? Or I can't.
I mean, because when you start getting into financials and stuff like that, and I'm not saying the executive director would sit down and, I mean, they would bring in resources on our behalf to look at the financials, to go line by line to say, oh, you may not like this, they kind of hide this debt or something here, or whatever. I'm not an accountant,
Right, no,
I mean, and that's, and in some of those things, you do need to have some expertise and specialized expertise so we don't make a misstep and overlook something that gets us into trouble at some point in time. Thinking, we got a great plan, and then a year or 2 down the road, find out we were sold a bill of goods or whatever.
So that means there has to be such an animal, basically.
Well, I'm not sure there's a firm,
Yeah.
as Jack is referring to, that does this work. Again, these are usually individuals that have been in the field, as I understand, these executive directors that have had experience with urban renewals, and so they have those resources. They know what firms to reach out to and say, so-and-so accounting, take these financials and tell me what they say. And then they would put together all this information and come back to us and say, here's what our analysis are, the team, and some of them are quite large, and they have a team to do a lot of this work. Like the City County Denver. I mean, the City of Denver, they have a large team that can do a lot of this stuff that we're not going to be able to do. So we need to have expertise come in, and you pay for that expertise as you go, and they would come back and say, I recommend you move forward, or have further discussions, or not move forward.
Right.
Some of the municipalities with urban renewal use city staff to do this work.
And recompense the city however.
Yeah, I don't know how they do it, but it's send it to the planning department or the zoning department or whatever, and they're gonna do it. But I don't think we're in that position. And, one of the ideal kinds of individuals that would do this would be an old, experienced construction lender. Because they've had to deal, in the course of their career, they've had to deal with all this stuff. They've probably come in contact with it. The one thing they may not have come in contact with is the municipal debt market. Because if they're a commercial construction lender, it's very rare that they would be dealing with that. But, and of course, in this particular case, it's not to loan money, it's to see the feasibility of the project. And even construction lenders use consultants from time to time to help them assist with the process. But a construction lender or somebody like that from a bank can do the analysis. You don't need an accountant to do it. You need somebody who knows how to credit analysis and can see if the financial statements, the income statements or tax returns, whichever we get, make sense and tie together. And that the future looks rosy, at least, that they'll have the financial capacity in the future and can make the capital calls, blah, 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 blah. There's so many nuances to this thing that, you know, it's going to be expensive. You know, but I think we need to start the search after you take a look at all this stuff and you agree to see if there's somebody out there, kind of like what you're doing with the attorneys, to see if we can at least get them kind of locked in. And if we get a project, because once we get a project, we're going to have 10 grand. We can start paying. Or whatever we choose to have an ante. Because the developers are basically at a casino right now with us. You know, they're looking at putting up at least hundreds of thousands of dollars, and with no guarantee of a return on it until we come in and we issue the debt, or we all agree, we have a redevelopment agreement, the city agrees to it, they start building it. And they still don't know. They got to finish the project. You get to the end of the line and we're in a depression. Thing doesn't pay off for them, doesn't pay off for us, and they lose all their money. Might as well have gone to Vegas and put it on 26 black. You know, that's all I can say.
It's a good number.
But on the other hand, they have the potential. That's why it's high risk. They have high reward.
Why does one become a developer?
I think your point's well taken. We need somebody to filter the information who knows enough about the general approach. So
Okay, so
we move on that.
Yep, we'll move this to a study session after our next, in our December meeting.
Okay, let's be real clear. What is it that you would like for us to bring back? Are you going to provide us comments that we can
I
incorporate
think
and
the
distill?
different members will bring in comments either prior or at the study session. We'll discuss whether you've discovered any firms. I'm going to reach out to Maureen Fair, see what she understands. And one point, you know, I do want to point out to you is there are some urban renewals that use city resources. I'd venture to say that there are a fair amount of urban renewal boards. The city council is the urban renewal board. So they have that relationship where they can say, you know, budget department, look at this, planning department, look at that, you know, where we don't have that luxury. But I think it's to the city's credit that we are a separate entity. We're not just the city council sitting on that. There's more citizen involvement in this. So I think that's a good thing. There's pluses and minuses, and I think there's more pluses with our arrangement here with the city.
Do we need a motion, or is this just?
No, I think there's nothing to really move on until we figure out
Okay.
what we want to do. And I think we discuss it more at the study session and we see what comes out of that.
And one other question, we've talked about possibly having an attorney here for attorneys to interview in December after the meeting. We need to be aware of timing and how that all plays together.
We'll wait to see what comes up. If it's 5 firms, then I'll propose some dates to have a study session another time on this agenda, on this item.
For the record, I just want to say, Jack, and Carol, this is really great work. And
Ditto.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good job.
Okay, unfinished business, there's not, so on to new business. So after, we'll be going into a study session, and one of the things we're going to, in the study session, we're going to see a proposal or presentation on a possible movement the city council's taking on the Columbine Square area and Bellevue corridor. And you know, there's some master planning they're thinking of undertaking, which would change the look and the feel of the Bellevue corridor and also Columbine Square urban renewal area. So I have been approached that there may be a discussion as that moves forward and a master plan comes out, that there may be an opportunity for us to partner with the city through an IGA to invest in streetscape or other infrastructure issues in that area that are identified. And what I'm asking for is a motion for me to enter in discussions, preliminary discussions, if that were to come up with the city. Again, anything that would come out of that would come forward to the board. We'd also would want our own independent attorney to review that. Again, this is just to start those discussions to see if there's a potential, if it were to develop.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
I want to understand what this motion is to give you the authority to go and meet with whom? And
The city representative, which is going to be Mr. Count.
to discuss,
A potential intergovernmental agreement between LIFT and the city to help fund any streetscape or other infrastructure improvements to the Columbine Square urban renewal area.
And I would assume that would include the limitations that we've been talking about, such as finding out what, with a mind towards what we're allowed to do.
Correct, exactly.
It's
Yes, this is just, again, having those discussions, what does it look like? I would bring that back to the full board and for full legal review. Mr. Kemp, do you have some comments?
I do have one comment, which is, this is just for the record. On this particular issue, I will not be representing the NIF board. I'll be representing the city council. I can state on behalf of the council that they're aware of the statute 3125-112, which specifically authorizes cooperation between public bodies. So this is in line with that statute. And at this point, as I read this motion, this is just nothing more than a preliminary authorization to start discussions. Certainly from the city standpoint, this would have to ultimately get reduced to a written document that both parties, governing boards would have to approve. But I'm not going to speak any further because at this point, I am going to be representing the city council on this item, and I don't have anything else to say.
Everybody
Fair enough.
has their favorites.
Yes, I'm afraid so.
But yeah, this is just strictly exploratory. It doesn't give you the authority
No, it
to
does
go
not.
and make any commitment or do anything except bring us some information and where we might go from here. Here's what our
Correct.
authority is, here's what we can do.
Correct.
So we're just learning,
Yep.
learning motion.
Correct.
and learning, that's a great way to describe this, and I would prefer that the whole group learn rather than a single individual of this committee. And to me, it's a subject that the community would be very interested in hearing as well. And I don't know why we can't do it in a regular meeting when we're all here and have an opportunity to hear the same thing and discuss and hear what, the conversation among us.
I think that in many instances, these type of discussions would happen between the executive director for the board and the city. Since we don't have one, the city has reached out to me to be the representative to have those discussions. Again, this is, what you have to understand is, whatever comes out of those discussions, I fully intend to have whatever legal representation we have review it. This full board will review it. There will be public comment on it. This is, but this is just, again, we could have hours and hours and hours of discussions in this forum that doesn't, this is just to expedite it and streamline the process. Nothing is going to be hidden. It's, again, this motion does not authorize me to enter an agreement. The full board has to authorize it, and I'm not asking for the board to give me any kind of such authorization, other than just having those discussions with the city on what an agreement might look like.
Do we have a motion on the table?
Yes, we do. We're having a discussion.
I amend the motion. I move to amend the motion to add that the vice chairman of this LIF board will participate in those discussions.
Second.
Any discussions on the amended motion, the amendment?
On the amendment, yes.
Yes, the reason I propose that because we have two people that can report back to us. And, it's not that there's no lack of trust, don't get me wrong on that. But with two people, you're gonna absorb all the information, and you have different ideas about what may or may not occur. Rather than have the entire board engaged in those negotiations, I think the two of you are elected and competent parties, so I can see that we'd be well represented as a board in these negotiations. Preliminary investigations, things like that. That's why I did it.
Any other discussion? So on the amendment to the motion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The amendment carries. On the original motion, all those in...
As amended.
I'm sorry?
On the original motion as amended, I guess. Or...
Yes.
Yeah, all right.
The original motion,
The
yeah.
original motion is amended.
As amended. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay. Next item is discussion regarding a study session with the Columbine Square property owners. So what I am proposing, that what I want to move forward with doing is working with the city staff is identify who the current owners are within the Columbine Square urban renewal area and schedule a study session, invite them to a study session either in January or February to start having discussions with them on what they want to see happen within this urban renewal district, if anything. What are their challenges? What do they need to see their businesses not just survive, but thrive and move forward? And again, we're not saying to them, this is what we want to do. It's just to start that conversation with them to see what their challenges are, what they have, what their issues are with that area, if any. And so we can start making educated decisions on how we may or may not partner with them to help them achieve the goals for that area. Yes, do you have a comment?
I was going to just make a statement more so, and maybe Jocelyn can, have we heard anything from the owners at Columbine Square in the last 2 or 3 months?
Go ahead.
Okay.
And that group is also going to be invited to come to the table.
Right.
I think it would be good if they have anything that the other business owners hear what their thoughts are.
I have had a conversation with the joint venture partner, Lawrence Brockman, and he expects to have something presented to the city before the end of the year.
Really?
I thought it was interesting. I said, you think you'll have something in the next 5 months? He said, oh, we'll have something by the end of the year, and that was probably a good month ago. So, just FYI.
Okay.
So I wonder if, I think it's a good idea, I wonder if a format, because Jocelyn has done a really good job in the past, like when we went through design standards, of having a combination kind of presentation and then community input, rather than the more traditional study session format we have, so that it will give the public more of a chance to interact with us. I think in a study session, we all sit here and kind of talk to each other and give our own ideas, but there's limited opportunity for public input. And if we really want to get input from them with it, because it says with the owners, that we ought to think about the exact format we have so that it facilitates both of those. So I might throw it back to staff and say, what do you think would work best?
Okay. I do, plan to reach out to some, to Paul and a few others to just have that, how do we set that up to be effective?
Rock on. Yeah.
I think we have some homework to do before we bring, we need to understand what our financial circumstances are and what it is that we are even able to offer.
I'm not suggesting we are offering anything. What I am suggesting is, last year when I was on the board, we got stuck on these one subject issues, and it bogged the board down. We've got a lot of irons in the fire, but I think we still need to move forward and have these multiple discussions instead of waiting till one gets cleaned up and then we moved on to the next one. I am not suggesting I'm not saying we're going to offer anything. It is basically, I want to hear what they see this area doing. And then we come back and we're saying, how does that fit within what we can do legally? Can we do anything? We may not hear anything that we can do anything about.
Yeah.
We may hear some great ideas or some great challenges that we can help them overcome. Again, I don't know what these people are facing. I know they're facing, I was over there 6-7 weeks ago. The homeless are setting up a tent city in the Columbine Square area. That can't be good for them. It can't be good for those businesses. It can't be good for the residences. So we've got to do something to help move the needle on this. And I think the first step is we're not telling them what we can do for them.
Yeah.
I want to hear what they need from us or the city.
What is the best format for, in my mind, you've got two parties who haven't talked to one another in a really long time, so it's like the reopening of China, right? And
Does that make you Nixon?
That was my dream growing up. What is the best format for sitting down and just figuring out, look, what are you thinking? We haven't heard from you in a long time. What's on your mind? Something that, and I think that a presentation to the city probably is a strong idea, but I'm wondering if that's like a next step. Is there some informal, even study session sounds too formal, doesn't it? Yeah, but I don't know what the answer is. Is it a committee meeting where you take them out to coffee? I don't know what it is.
That's what I was thinking is, would you just take a small group, like a couple people from the board, and you sit down with them over coffee or something like that, and you have a discussion?
I kind of see it as some of the interaction that they had for the Bellevue corridor thing, and maybe we have some people from the Bellevue corridor with the city that are familiar with that. This process the city's going through on looking at a master plan for this area. Maybe some of that presentation, and those folks are there, and we find a way to structure it that is engaging. It is trying to find information, just like those community outreaches that took place during the whole Bellevue corridor process. I think there does need to be some structure, I'm not entirely sure what that looks like, and that's part of why I'm gonna start talking with the city staff and what's worked with them and you know, planning and so forth, and just say, how does this look? What do we do? And, you know, give us a few months to talk about it. Jack?
Well, once again, I'm way over here. I'd feel a lot more comfortable if the city itself would lead this discussion and we participate because we don't have a big part to say. You know, sure, we want to know what the property owners would like to have, but the city has in my mind, has a bigger stake because they can do a lot more things to satiate whatever the businesses want or whatever else. But if it comes to financing some of this stuff, then we're just a small actor in this deal. And I suggest that the city take the lead, and then it can be whatever kind of study session or however they want to structure it. It's not our deal, but we participate.
We still know people over there?
Yeah, I think that's what, you know, I was saying earlier, Jocelyn and her staff have really done a good job of doing this before. I think you're right, Jack. Good way to do it. That's it. Move on.
The developer and the joint venture partner have not been very, I think, forthright. Would you agree with that, Jocelyn? I mean, we've reached out trying to get some communication going with them, and they're just like, we're working on it. So they're not really telling us much. And the reason I made that call out to Lauren in the first place was to make sure that they saw the presentation that we saw at study session a couple of weeks ago, and to say, you know, citizens in the city are thinking about this, and we want you guys to be aware of the potential of that area, not only Columbine Square, but the whole Bellevue corridor. And he said he hadn't watched it, but he was thankful that I gave him a call, that he was going to take a look at it and take the recommendations into consideration.
Carol?
I know there are people that, and Bill has voiced his opinion that the city did a really good job with the Bellevue corridor and Columbine Square area, but if you talk to the people who live over there, pardon me?
I wasn't referring to that one, I was referring to design guidelines and such. I didn't attend those.
Okay. People do not like to go in and look at poster boards and read language. They want to engage. And we had a time, and Bill, you probably have attended some of them, where we had district meetings in the council chamber. And we had great turnout, and they were well managed. But what we got is a community that actually had a conversation together back and forth. We could hear what this side of the room wanted, what somebody over here wanted, and you could find out that what you wanted is exactly opposite of what he wanted, which means it brings an awareness that we've got some conflicting views, and not all of us are going to be happy in the end, but they were really dynamic. And Jason, I think that's kind of what you're looking for, is an opportunity for citizens and property owners over there to really be able to engage. If we do it in isolation, we're not going to get the kind of result we need. We need the business owners, the property owners, and the citizens that live over there, and any citizen that's in the community that wants to participate, to come together. And we're going to get a whole lot better outcome if we have a real conversation. But looking at a poster board and writing comments down doesn't get us where we need to go. I've been through it too many times.
My thought was just, I don't necessarily disagree with that. My thought was just that I'd just like to know what these guys are thinking. Like on a like, because we have no idea, and you know, to the gentleman's point, you know, we just, it's because they're strong arming us. But
I think what we're missing here is we're focusing on one property owner. Yes, they have a large piece of property.
yeah,
I get that. There are many other property owners in this area, and we're not having a conversation with them. And I want to have that conversation.
yeah.
Because one of the things we're looking at is one of the opportunities we could do are matching grants or some sort of a grant process where, and I use as examples with O'Toole's. I mean, their parking lot sucks, okay? They may not be doing anything with their parking lot because they have to deal with storm drainage. and that's very expensive. If they come to us and say, we want to fix our parking lot where we can't, that is something, it's an infrastructure thing that we can partner with them and, and move forward with something. But if all the other property owners, how many there are, let's say there's 20 of them, I just don't know there are. They come to us and we're off base, I'm off base. They're not looking for that from the city or from us. Okay, what is it you're looking for? I don't think we know. Again, we're just focusing on the one property, and we're waiting for something to happen with that, and that's not helping that neighborhood. And if we engage with the business owners and we're doing something that does help them and help that, and if what we do, if we engage in some positive changes that improve that area, that may incentivize Chang and company to do something with that property finally.
So these sound like interviews to me. I interrupted you, I'm sorry.
No.
I hear Carol's call for later when we know more, or when there's something to present, giving the key. But I think we're starting out with, what I would really like to hear is just interviews with those property owners. What is it you want? On a very, very informal level, like, don't talk to me about plans, don't talk to me about budgets, just tell me what your problem is. And
That's what I'm looking for.
Open dialogue.
Just having that dialogue.
I think some of this work has been done by the city, and we did it at St. James, and that's what Carol's referring to, where they did the poster work, and that's what the Bellevue Vision, Bellevue Corridor Vision Plan is exactly what the neighbors did, and I don't know how many of the owners were there. I don't know, but so a lot of this work has been done. We haven't had the open forum like Carol's recommending, but I don't want you to think we're starting at zero either.
No, I'm not saying but I attended that also.
Sure.
And most of what I was hearing were from residents. And they're talking about their property values going down because of the homeless. They don't feel safe. They're locking windows, they're locking doors, and all this other stuff.
And that was before the buildings were torn down.
That was before the fire and everything else.
And I've gotten complaints also about the homeless, but I haven't gotten anything in the last month or so. So that's good.
Yeah, I called the city. I called the city manager, Mark. I talked to him when I was over there. Because they were setting up a city over there.
Yeah, they've got some really nice furniture, actually. Parking lot, I was looking at
That is
some of it.
a code enforcement issue.
It is.
That needs to be taken care of. Those
Absolutely.
people over there shouldn't have to suffer with that.
Well, one of the things that the owners did request, and again, Jocelyn, I'm pretty sure they request to take the fence down. Weren't they going to take the fence down just just open that up?
That's what we heard, but
Yeah.
you notice nothing has happened
Yeah,
yet.
I noticed, and now the screens are blowing in the wind again, and so I might make a call to Lauren tomorrow and just ask them what their intention is, because they came to us and said, we'd like to take the fence down. It's been up for 3 years, and the cost of keeping that fence there, and now they're not protecting anything, obviously.
It's just hiding the homeless.
It's just hiding the homeless, exactly.
Well, I think if we're going to do something like this, and this is different from what I had envisioned based on the agenda, that we need to be careful in how we invite. We need to give them a little background information, invite them, and figure out how we're going to do it. But I want a real dialogue.
That's exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I think
And not just, we've got property owners over there, and then we've got business owners, and they may not be the same thing, most likely they're not. You've got Littleton citizens. We have Englewood citizens that live on the north side of Bellevue that need to be included in this as well. Because those Englewood citizens actually can impact any kind of a zoning change that happens over there in that area for any part of it. So, we need to hear from all parts.
So the focus of what I would like to do next is engage with the property and business owners to have other than the one. I mean, they'll be invited, the biggest player, if we don't already know what their plans are.
Right.
But even with, we do know what their plans are. I think it could be a good opportunity for him to share with those other ones, and they can get direct feedback from those people. Again, anything that we undertake is going to be with those businesses if we do anything. And there may not be anything. Okay, that's fine. But even if, it would be nice to get their, what is their vision? So even as we look at, and this is good for planning and city and everybody else, if whatever proposal comes forward, it may not mesh with even what the business owners and the property owners want in this area. Again, I'm just trying to start having a positive discussion that it's more of for me, a listening. It's just, what are the needs? What are the desires? What are the challenges? And then we can come back and say, can we help with any of these? And at the end of the day, we may not. But again, I think it's just an opportunity for people to talk and share their thoughts.
Getting back to kind of what Carol was talking about, kind of the people, the residents and that type of thing. It might be beneficial, we want it to keep it informal, but it might be beneficial if we kind of come up with an idea of how we want this to happen. Maybe it's not just we make it an agenda item, it's something where we've actually thought about who needs to be here and what we need to ask and that kind of thing. I mean, you keep it informal and make sure it's a dialogue between us, but we have some idea of how to make that happen.
Open mic. Give people 3 or 4 minutes. Open mic, come down and just take your turn, and we're there listening.
Developmental improv.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yes, and.
Karaoke, but that's all I'm saying is, there's some kind of an agenda.
Right, no, I want to work with staff that have been involved with these other projects, to the Bellevue Corridor and such, to help, because I think it does need to be structured, it needs to have some sort of a framework. But I just want the board to know that this is the direction I think we should go in. And again, it's more of a listening session than it is anything else at this point.
Do you need a motion on this, Kevin, or what do you want?
I don't know. I don't think no. I'm just sharing that these are my thoughts, and I want to get your input on how you'd like to see some of this structured.
Could we bring it back next meeting, and as an agenda item, give us another month to think about it?
Sure, I can bring back, I hope to have some discussions with staff between now and then, and I can maybe have something more
Like, what's the best
fleshed
format?
out that it would look like.
That's great.
Okay? Great. Next item is board member terms discussion, and I'll turn this over to Carol because she has brought this up and she can share what her concerns are.
Some people when they were appointed to this board, were just given a 5-year term. And that was incorrect. We had people that were appointed to fulfill terms where people had resigned. And it ended up having a situation with our membership where 5 of us are rotating off at the same time or something like that. So I had gone back to the very beginning of time when the Urban Renewal Authority was created and tracked down the memberships. And it's all done, it's prescribed by law how it needs to be. And with 7 members, we have 2 years where the 2 of us rotate off at all times. And then it's just 1 member the other 3 years. So what happened, Jason is the one that's on the hot seat because when he was appointed for a full 5-year term rather than to fulfill a term that someone had resigned. And so your term says your term expires January 5th of 2020, when actually it rotates off on January 5th of 2019. So what I had suggested to Kevin, that what we do as a board is make a recommendation to council, if this appeals to Jason, to recommend to the council that they go ahead and renew Jason's appointment for the next 5 years so that he can
he's the one that's been told incorrectly when your term would end it. And if you want to continue to serve on LIFT, I think that the council would probably consider a recommendation from this board that we would like Jason to.
Is that how it works?
Well, it's actually how it used to work.
Yeah.
If you go back and read all the minutes, that's exactly how it worked.
No, I mean, if the council so chose, I'd be happy to continue it. It doesn't.
The council would make a decision. They will either reappoint you or they will go through an interview process and then determine what to do. But it is their decision.
Sure, yes.
So it is my understanding that the city clerk and the city attorney researched this last year when this came up at the end of the last board session. And it has been resolved. What I would recommend is that we ask them to provide a report and recommendation that if this has been resolved or not.
Mr. Chair, we'd be happy to do that. That's my understanding from the city clerk, as she has gone back. She took the research provided by this board, and she is satisfied that this is resolved. But if, and obviously the city clerk is the custodian of the city's records, that's going to be binding. But if, we will report back to you at the next meeting. And frankly, if there's something that needs to be done, certainly the city clerk and I will take that to the council and proceed accordingly.
Well, I'm happy to reapply, so it's
Well,
not a
again,
problem either way.
Again, I mean, the city council makes these appointments. It's up to them to make that change. We can make a recommendation. Before we make that recommendation, I think the city council has asked the city clerk and the city attorney to review this. They have, I would recommend that they go back, review that, and report back to us what that was, so we have it formally, and then we can make a decision whether we need to make some motion.
Absolutely, we will go back, we will look at that, we'll report back. I don't think it's either appropriate or proper for this board to make a recommendation on reappointments. That's an exclusive responsibility of the city council, and if it needs to be done, the city council will take care of it.
They also determine terms, correct?
No.
No, but this board by statute has specific terms.
Right, but I mean,
In terms for
Yes, what
appointees,
term? Yeah.
yes.
Yes.
so what's the point?
Well, we've been through it, and Wendy has taken my chart, and that's what she has used. And there's just one that's hasn't been resolved because how can you resolve it? They were making appointments, and they've got the term figured out. They know where the slots are. They've just got you in a different slot. And you can't have more than 2 people rotating off. So I'll sit down with Wendy again. I mean, we've been through this already.
And that's fine, I just look at the list we have here, and we have one coming off in 19.
This is
what you're prescribing it to be,
not
correct?
related.
I'm not sure what you're looking at.
This doesn't have a title to it, so.
This was in the packet. So I-
Oh, no, this is not mine.
No.
No.
Okay. Then my question, Carol, is what should it look like, and can we get that?
Because
This is the chart. And when it first started, the terms were staggered. Somebody had a 1-year term, a 2-year term, a 3- or 4-year, 5-year. And at one point, we had council members that were part of this. Then there were a period of time when there was no council member serving. But you go through the minutes and you can track when Tom Christopite was replaced by Steve Lyon. That was a term that was 91 through 85. And you just track it down. And what we end up with is where the slot where you are is a term that expires on January 5th of 2019. So that's what, I just would like to get it all sorted out, back on track, and we're almost there. We've got the one issue.
Yeah, I was under the impression this was resolved this last year. I'm asking that we get a report, we see what that finding is. If, once we review that, if we have something, a recommendation, some sort of motion or recommendation, the city council addresses it, we can make it at that time.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, that's exactly what we're going to do. We will provide you a report. My understanding as well is, based on my conversation with the city clerk, is that the terms are resolved, but we will provide you a report based on her recommendation. If we need to go back to do something, then the city council would take care of it. It does not require any action of this board.
Okay, thank you. So now we come to the second period of public comment. Again, citizens, public is welcome to come forward and make any comments, questions, queries, ponders. Please state your name for the record and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Is there anybody who wishes to come forward?
Hello, my name is Lisa Sacre. I live in District 1. I am one of those citizens who do live right behind Columbine Square so this really impacts me, and I didn't speak earlier because I wanted to hear what was going to proceed, and so I came up with some concerns. So in looking at this, I know we'll go over this later, and I know these pictures are floating around, and I know there are suggestions by the city, because the city hires individuals to create these gorgeous pictures. But in reality, this is not what I would ever expect. Some of these buildings sorry for my notes, I love this open space. I travel Bellevue every day to work and home. I shop at King Soopers. I go to the Home Depot there. This is kind of where I shop. And when I see something that is so radical and it's hiding the businesses, it makes me wonder why. Why do you want to hide those businesses? If I was a business, I surely would not want to be here, because how would someone know that I'm here? And not to mention the narrowing of the streets is it's just a radical change, and I don't like it. And I know you're talking about having open meetings, and my suggestion is to listen, to zip this, and just let the people talk. They want to be heard and not take 1,000 surveys. I'm so sick of surveys, because really anyone from outside of this community can take those surveys and put their input, and they have no, they can make all the suggestions in the world, but they're not impacted by it. The people who live there are the ones who are going to be impacted by other people's decisions. And so if you were in my community, in my shoes, and you travel up and down Bellevue, what would you like to see? This I would not like to see. Definitely not this, because this to me, it's one thing if this was ground zero and you could build it like Belmar was ground zero, because that used to be the old Villa Italian. I used to shop there in the same way with some of the old shopping centers and even Cinderella City. And it's one thing you can build all of this, but you have existing businesses that you're going to have to deal with. And from here to this, I know this is a sample, but that's radical. And I hope you just let the citizens be heard, and you're going to hear all kinds of opinions, and some of it's not going to be nice. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Oh, yeah. You started a fire.
Got my fire going. Jeannie Erickson, District 1. You were asking, what do the property owners want from urban renewal? Do any of you here realize that none of these property owners asked to be in urban renewal? None of them asked for this. Not one. Not one person in this one property owner asked for urban renewal. Asked to be in an urban renewal zone.
Except for Jane.
That's crazy to me that you actually think any of these people wanted this. I've been around since the beginning of this, since they were doing the surveys of slum and blight. None of these people wanted to be in here. All kinds of people wanted out. They're like, no, I don't want any of this. I don't need the city's help with anything. I was also at all 3 of the Bellevue Corridor meetings, and they were not engaging whatsoever. The very first one was because it was a good meeting where people were in an audience. There was city staff up there, and you got to raise your hand and ask questions. But after that very first one, the city decided they did not like that. They didn't like it. The people got to ask questions and the whole audience got to hear them, and that they actually had to give an answer back to everyone. They didn't like that at all. So then they went to the tag boards. And that second one, people walked in, looked and saw that you could not sit and ask questions, that there was no one to ask a question to, and they walked out the door. I stayed there and watched them. And they did it at the 3rd meeting also, when they saw it was the same. Well, I think even less people came to the 3rd meeting. You can count how many people came in the door, but that's not an accurate count when they stayed 2 minutes. I'm very, very concerned about a meeting of what these businesses want. If they wanted anything from urban renewal, they would have already asked. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
I'm still Pam Chadbourne, and I'm still a block and a half from here, so I did take some notes. For conflicts of interest with a lawyer, you need to get the Columbine Square folks. They have 2 real estate companies as part of their package. You can see it on the website. You've got to get those in for your conflict of interest too. For completion bonds, it's a really big deal for DIA. You may have heard in the news, we're paying a lot more so that there's less risk with completion bonds. Very good point, and needs to be considered. We need a risk analysis. I would say we because it's all of us. A second opinion. The Riverfront Authority got its second opinion, or actually for the riverfront concept, 4 months after they signed the deal. That's not when you get the second opinion. You get it before you sign the deal. And the whole reason, or one of the huge drivers for the decision to pick Ryder Corp was because they were thought to be very prosperous and flush. And it still failed. So 2 of the things that you folks brought up are very essential, and they were the cause of the failure of the Riverfront Center. Please look at that. And the third thing I didn't hear was the change process. Is it going to be a nickel and dime process or a level of effort? You need to know when the project changes, when it changes, not if, how that will be handled as well. I don't want you to use city resources. I don't think our city's depth in most of this stuff is very great. However, I will say, as far as meeting with property owners and business owners, we have an economic development department, and that's their job. It is not your job. Your job is to cure slum and blight and to remove hazards to public safety. That is what you are here for. You are not here for economic development or to help business owners or property owners, definitely not property owners, make money. That is not your job. That is not what citizens need you to do. So please remove that. I'm really surprised that that didn't come up as part of the conversation. I do thank you for your efforts, but we shouldn't be leaning over backwards for the Columbine Square owners. And Jeannie said no one asked to be there. The Columbine Square owners did. They came before city council 2 years ago now and said, we're going to have a plan for you in a month or two. 2 years later, where is it? So, thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any others?
I just have a few comments. Pam mentioned community character, and in your existing urban renewal plan, it talks about the vision for the future of the Columbine Square area, and it says in section 3-1, it says foster, quote, foster a small town family-friendly character. And Appendix A includes the citywide plan as of 2015, and it includes assets, priorities, and opportunities. And the number one priority is a hometown feel on page 38 of the urban renewal plan. And then just to note, Centennial Square goes to council for a rezoning in December. That's one of the properties that is over here on the right-hand side. So that's going. They want a B3 zoning. And it's currently, the front part's what, a B2? And then finally, if you stick to your urban renewal plan, you as a board don't have to have any public comment because that comment already has happened, allegedly. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. We will close this. Next, we are going to adjourn and then go into a study session. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Is that Bill?
Is that a second?
It's not a second. I had one thing I wanted to just throw out on the table. We just had an election, and there have been changes as that has evolved. And I think we ought to have a study session or a briefing, maybe by the city attorney or whatever, if we're in compliance with current governance issues, the city council has certain protocols that they like all their boards and commissions to follow, and even though we're an independent board, we should be consistent with them in a lot of ways. And I just think we ought to be able to have a briefing from the city attorney or a study session or whatever form it may take, to make sure that we're in compliance with that. It's just kind of a housekeeping matter. It's not a big deal, and I don't think it should take a lot of time. So I'd just like to see if we might want to add that to the
Could it just be
study
done
session.
through a memo? I'm trying to think what was on the ballot. I don't think there's a thing on the ballot that impacts us. We don't.
Well, that's what I don't know.
Well, the charter does not. We heard that at the very beginning of the meeting. And they were charter changes, so they really have no impact on us.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I can either do this by a memo and make some suggestions, or if the board wishes to have a study session, that I think ultimately, if you're going to make any changes in governance or how you do your agendas or whatever, that's going to require a formal board action. And normally that would be something where in most of the city's boards, we would probably do a study session where the board, we'd talk about different things, and then the board would decide whether they wanted to provide that direction. I'm pleased to do it either way.
I would request that you provide us a memo with anything that we should be considering or
Sure.
about. Then we can review that, and there could be a request at that time to go have a study session to discuss it further to see it.
That's cool.
All right.
I just want to make sure.
Yeah,
we're
that makes sense, yeah.
I'm glad you brought it up because we have another layer of government on our area here. Because I think, didn't the fire deal pass? So now they need to have a letter of cooperation and be offered a seat at the table here.
They don't need to be offered a seat
That's right.
because we're grandfathered on that one. But we do probably have to do an agreement with that.
This is the type of thing we need to make sure we're
So
doing.
could you address that, Mr. Kemp?
Yes.
Thank you. And is that something you would be able to help us with in negotiating with the fire?
Absolutely.
So do I have a second on the motion then to adjourn?
I'll second.
Yeah, you don't need to have a vote on that. If there's just a motion on the floor, you can declare that the meeting is adjourned and move into the study session.
Acclamation.
The meeting is adjourned. I recommend a 5-minute break so we could stretch or whatever, and then we'll go into study session at 8:25.
Why don't you just come down here?
we start? Okay, just in the interest of time. Yes. Okay, let's bring this back to the study session now. What City Council has requested, that city staff and also I think staff from the architectural firm they engaged in come forward and present to us where they at with these two different areas. The Envision Littleton is the whole vision of Littleton and how things will move. And this is a point in time document. This is not complete. They're still working on it, if I'm correct. So this is just some information to provide to us on how it impacts what their visioning is and and again how it impacts Columbine Square. The second one is exploring possible master planning opportunities, and one of them is the Bellevue corridor in relationship to Columbine Square and what that area can look like. There were other things, other areas they also talked about in their presentation, but I think they've condensed it down to what, how it may impact us. And again, with their presentation, it could look like this. They have not been engaged by City Council yet, I don't believe yet, to move forward with coming up with what the city and the residents and other stakeholders, what this vision really would be for that. This is, if they were to go forward with this, this is the kind of what they think it might, what the opportunities could be. Is that a fair statement?
Fair, yes.
Okay. Yes. So I will turn it over to them to give their presentations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and board members. I'm Jocelyn Mills, Community Development Director for the city, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening. And as you mentioned, we have two different presentations. The first one on Envision Littleton, I will cover that here, and that shouldn't take that long. And then the second one being the presentation from Bryant Flink Architects that presented a similar presentation to council a couple weeks back. So briefly on Envision Littleton, this is a project that the city is undertaking to create a unifying vision for our community. And I didn't know, quick question to start, has anyone heard of Envision Littleton?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic, great, thank you. Well, that's awesome, that's really exciting, and I'm glad to hear, because that was one of the impetus when City Council directed staff to start this project in April. One of the big things they said, really, we want to create broad community input on this visioning process, as well as to really reach out and start building partnerships and relationships within the community. So I'm really excited that you all have heard of it. And I'm going to quickly go over it. But one point to note where we're at in the project is next Tuesday, there's a joint meeting with the Planning Commission and the City Council to go over the final draft of the document. So the vision document, and I'm going to tell you about the process, we're at the stage where we have a final draft. They'll have a study session about that next week. We'll have it out for the community to look at, and then it comes forward for formal review and adoption by the end of the year. It goes to Planning Commission for a recommendation, then City Council, obviously, for adoption. So I want to give you some background on kind of what we've done to date. Use this. So, as I said, we started in April, and really over the 12 months of summers, we're in 12 weeks in summer. I wish it was 12 months. We really took it out to the community to say, hey, what do you like about Littleton? What's your vision? What are your hopes for the future? What are some of the challenges that you have? This screen behind me shows an overview of the number of outreach points that we brought to the community. And we had over 3,000 points of contact with the community, including we had done an online survey, and so we got a lot of feedback from that. We did some listening sessions. We were at some of the city's events over the summer. We were at the library, really trying to get that broad input from the spectrum of our community. So the other piece that we really took on is with the survey made it the easiest. In the survey, one of the questions was to give your address or at least an intersection so that we could start mapping that data. And really the point was to make sure that we are reaching all areas of Littleton. So it's hard to see on this map, but that the map in the corner shows where those surveys came from. And we're really excited. We feel we've reached a pretty broad section of Littleton with the summer. This, up until last week, we were at the check our work stage so we had created a draft, went back out to the community and say, hey, how does it look? Did we get it right? Did we hear what you said? And so we're pretty excited. We got a lot of good input about that. And from that, we made some tweaks to the document, which I said will be presented to City Council and Planning Commission next week. And also recognizing that this is the starting point. So we're creating a city-wide vision, and then next year, the council has directed us to now take on an update to our comprehensive plan, which I noticed, was part of the objectives in your development proposals were the funding request for projects. So we will be updating that comprehensive plan next year, as well as creating, for the first time ever, a transportation master plan. So we've got a lot of exciting things coming up, and the vision is just the start of that. So like I just said, here is a graphic that shows you where we're at, which is we just are wrapping up the finish your work stage, and the next piece would be to bring the final document before the City Council, before the community, for adoption. Here's just a quick overview. So of all the conversations that we've had since April, here's really a lot of what people are saying, who and what we are. People love Littleton. I love Littleton. We all love Littleton. What sets us apart? What do we strive for? So these are really the key elements that are the foundation of the vision that we're working on. The other piece is taking those values and input and what we as Littleton strive for ourselves is coming up with these 5 guiding principles. That we're an anchored community, that we're authentic, connected, active, and engaged. And these are really important because these will serve as our kind of litmus test, if you will, moving forward. The other piece that really came out of the conversations over the summer is that we know that we're an authentic small town and everyone really identifies with that character of Littleton. So that's the other piece, just making sure that we can articulate who and what we are and then help put into place, how do we maintain that in the future. And I think one of the examples that often resonated for me that we were using over the summer is, think of yourself as Rip Van Winkle, and the story is, right, he falls asleep, and then 20 years later he wakes up, and do you know where you are? So that's the conversation, how do we make sure we keep Littleton? And going back to those 5 guiding principles, how we're looking at it is, if it's a camera, for future decision-making moving forward, we'll be using those 5 principles, and whether it's a project or a conversation, would have to, meet all those 5 lenses, if you will, because if you only meet 3 out of the 5, then it's still not really in focus, it's still blurry. So it's about how do we use this as our guiding roadmap, if you will, moving forward and helping the city make decisions. And the other piece on this talks about comprehensive plan, the transportation plan, and then other future area plans that may come out of whether it's a conversation around the comprehensive plan and or, as you were mentioning earlier, from the Bellevue corridor plan or the downtown design standards. Those are some recent projects that the city took on, and they both have an implementation piece, to move them forward. So quickly, here's our overall timeline. As we said, the vision and guiding principles that will be adopted by council by the end of this year. We'll take on a comprehensive update to the comp plan as well as the transportation master plan. The timeline of that is basically starting January with the goal of being done by the end of October. It says December, but really the goal would be by the end of October. And then from there, what are the future plans looking forward? And one of them we know we definitely want to work on is the city land use zoning code and that. So that's what this map shows here. And we're still, working on listening and learning along the way. I like this graphic because it really does show the continuum of how we're going to continue to evolve as we work through this comp plan update and the transportation master plan. So with that, I can answer any questions.
Questions? Thank you.
Well, great. Look for more to come, and like I said, once we launch into the comprehensive plan, we will be putting updates on our Littleton plans website, as well as making sure we're keeping the board in the loop.
So the draft, how'd you word it? Preliminary draft, final draft, or whatever, is going to be
Yes.
presented Tuesday?
Yes.
And that's at, I'd assume 6:30 here?
Yes, it is, and that will be posted on Littleton Plans, which is the website where we have this project on there, and you can learn everything about it.
Okay, thank you.
Great, well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I think we have to switch over.
Okay.
Yes, that's what they're getting ready to do.
We good?
Yep.
That's the one thing. I live in a neighborhood, I swear to God, everybody's over 75.
That's a good part of it. It is.
But it's see, over 20% of the population is under 18.
Seat, that's like a short seat.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Paul Bryant with Bryant Flink Architecture and Design. Brett Meek, a colleague of mine. Thank you for inviting us in. I'll start with thanking Jocelyn. Really, a lot of this inertia is coming from Mayor Brinkman with some sort of, not necessarily prodding, but wanting to see some things happen, move some things forward, and one of which was the Bellevue corridor plan, which was adopted this summer. And in here, there's an implementation strategy, and so which happens to fall within Columbine Square, of course. And so Mayor Brinkman and Jocelyn and some other folks are like, well, let's just get people excited about a possible implementation. What does that mean? What does it look like? So to the community that's here, and then obviously the board, this was a quick dive into what was proposed by the plan, which had, as we heard, 3 community meetings that may have not been as successful for some folks, but essentially the plan. So that's all we've done. We really spent 3 weeks and wanted to sort of get the juices flowing and have these meetings and get people excited about opportunity. And that's really what this is. It's not blighted parts of our city, it's opportunity. And I think there was some good discussion here in the meeting about that, the city leading the charge based on adopted plans, and what does the city want, what does the community want? And in particular, we're going to get to this in a minute, but in Columbine Square, in the plan, it talks about breaking down the super block, right? So it's a gigantic super block when there's no connectivity between the grid. And so what does that mean? If you implement the plan to break the super block down, what does that mean? And so we just started to take a look at it. And, if we continue down this path, we can imagine a much more robust discussion with the community and how we engage community, how we portray the design intent and visions and things like that. And so we're going to look at some of those today. But really, what we're going to look at is sort of a breakdown in just master planning, what that really means. I know there's folks in here with financial backgrounds and legal backgrounds, et cetera. So what does that mean to really get down and understand a plan and break it down? And then what are the policies that we can use on the city side to make these things work? And then certainly leverage a community like this and, to help facilitate better cities, better infrastructure, and, the opportunity, right? So without further ado, the agenda, and I know we're late, so I can get going talking, so I'll try to make it quick. But we're going to go through process and hierarchy, planning opportunities, critical planning opportunities. We just pared this down to Bellevue Corridor. We did look at some others with City Council, and then the implementation strategies. So moving on. And for what it's worth, laser pointers don't work on the screen. I'm sure you're aware now, so I can leave my pointing stick. But it's very effective. So, when you break down urban design planning, even on the suburban level and rural level, you start with comprehensive plan, which is what the city's engaged in now, right? So you have the hierarchy, the Envision Littleton, comprehensive plan, land use plan, transportation master plan, and then you look at neighborhood plans, which is essentially what Bellevue Corridor plans. You break down the neighborhood, what's the neighborhood, right? And then you get further and further down into granular sort of planning area plans, which is more specific to maybe just Centennial Square, and then even other planning initiatives that are driven off of that, which are similar to the design standards. So you can imagine you sort of just get more finite in detail as you go. And so where we are right now is in the corridor level that we're going to look at. So it's still in neighborhood plans. It's just visioning what was already adopted by City Council and Planning Commission. So as you're aware, I know that the 4 out of the 3 other areas within your charge sort of redacted, but there are other areas that haven't been looked at in some time, and I think that City Council has their eye on other opportunities to improve the city and really looking at corridors. So we talked a little bit about the PEL, the Santa Fe corridor. There's obviously issues with mineral, especially at Santa Fe, Broadway, Littleton Boulevard. But in our case today, we're just going to talk about Bellevue.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
As you go forward, are you going to persist in having a mistake on your map?
Please, tell us.
Jefferson County. That's not Jefferson County.
This right here?
Yep, that's town of Columbine Valley, and it's unincorporated Arapahoe County. And you'll find that the Jefferson County border is that straight line that goes down projected Sheridan Boulevard.
It's right behind my house.
Okay, right here.
Yep.
Gotcha.
There.
Thank you.
Since you show all the other neighboring political entities, you should show Highlands Ranch as a city. It's just a suggestion, just to make.
No, we appreciate that. Going through design standards, and Bill Hopping was part of the tech committee. There are subtle typos from time to time, but we get most of them. So, Bellevue Avenue Implementation Study, right? So this is where it was focused, and obviously this is the urban renewal area, but so this was the overall neighborhood that was surveyed and studied and considered. Going through the implementation and visioning, we took it based off of the new sort of mantra of the city and the 5 sort of lenses. Be anchored, authentic, connected, active, engaged, and for the sake of the evening, you can read that at your leisure. So, to refresh everybody about the Bellevue Avenue Corridor Plan, right, it's been adopted. Essentially, corridor vision and principles, the goals, policies, opportunity areas were identified, which are outside of the LIFT urban renewal, but they're still identified within the plan. And then corridor enhancements, those were identified within the plan of what the community wanted. And we're going to get to that in a minute. And then how do we implement the plan, right? So that's where we are. How do we implement the plan? So within the 3 community meetings and so on and so forth within the corridor plan, I guess we should talk about legacy documents, but the planning opportunity. So what was really sort of identified as a distinct character, mobility and safety in the built environment, right? So distinct character. And maybe distinct characters for some folks is a big, wide, suburban sprawl street. Maybe that is the character of Bellevue that is appealing to folks, and that's okay. But others would feel that this could be a street in Kansas, it could be a street in Idaho, it could be anywhere. This doesn't say Littleton. If we want to wake up Rip Van Winkle and think about Littleton, you know, maybe this isn't it, right? Maybe that sign isn't it. So existing character, desired character. So what was desired in the character about the corridor? And, you know, sure, there's trees that block businesses, but trees were identified. Detached sidewalks, safety, mobility, right? To do that, you got to pull the sidewalk off the street. You got to create a tree lawn. You need to create medians, planted medians, areas of refuge for pedestrians to cross streets. And within this, right, you start to feel like you're in a neighborhood again. You don't feel like you're in sprawl. And I could see an argument about the mountains, but I think when you're going up Bellevue, the mountains sort of lose their effect per se. But on the other hand, with a more focused point of view, you know, you might be able to focus in on that distant viewpoint a little bit more. You know, you might be able to focus in on Evans if you could just see it, if you plan for it correctly. And businesses survive with trees. Street trees, you know, that just happens. So do you want to see detached sidewalks in this environment, or is this appealing? In the plan, this was really what was described by the community. This is the character that what they were after.
Two questions on terminology. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Two questions on terminology. By detached sidewalk, you mean not what we have there where it's a curb to the street, but there's a median or something.
That's correct, yeah. So the sidewalk is attached to this curb and gutter.
Okay.
And in this case, the sidewalk is detached from the curb and gutter, and there's a tree lawn or a planted zone that allows a safer pedestrian experience for walking, mobility, etc.
And that was the second question, was the term tree lawn.
Tree lawn,
Never heard
yeah.
that.
Yeah, so planted median is sort of in the middle, and then a planted area, but we like to call it tree lawn because often that's where the trees are going to go, because I'm an architect. Yeah, that's right.
It encourages sauntering. I mean,
It does.
that sidewalk,
Sauntering.
you know, like from shop to shop, the sidewalk that is a curb, essentially, you don't walk it unless you're out of gas.
Well, that's the point. And so do we want a neighborhood that you can walk down? Do we want that? I would argue, and full disclosure, I live in Littleton, so I want a street I can walk down, personally.
It's also interesting to note that when you look at these development patterns historically, and this relates to how Littleton's constantly viewed by the residents as a small town. This suburban sprawl type development that's happening on the top in this image, this is a development pattern that's been common since the 1960s. But I don't necessarily think that when most people think small town, they think of this development pattern. They think of close-knit neighborhoods. They think of places, you know, where you can walk down the street, see a shop owner that you know, grab some groceries and walk back to the house. And it's just a different character. So part of this discussion is identifying what the character of the neighborhood is per the recommendations of the neighbors in the public meetings, and then just starting to say what it would look like. And then there's a twofold part as we work backwards between the combination of the policy that has to be in place in order to get those type of environments and the infrastructure and what your strategy is to achieve that infrastructure. So I just want to reiterate the fact that you're seeing images here, but the street on bottom is not, you know, exactly the street section that we think Bellevue needs to have. We're just starting a discussion to help identify what those areas of opportunity are and then tailor a solution that fits the area. So I just don't want anybody to panic when they see these images.
No, that's a very, really
It's Oregon, isn't it?
I'm not panicking.
Yeah, it looks like Oregon.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
What's the traffic count on Orenco Station at Hillsboro, Oregon? What's the traffic count on that street?
On TV Highway, I do not know what the traffic count is.
What's
I will
the
tell you that my
traffic
wife
count?
lives just down the street. I would probably say 30,000, maybe less.
No, I don't see it on this street. However, we know that Bellevue probably has about 45,000.
Orinco Station is in a much denser urban area. The volume of the street is much higher, actually, than Bellevue.
Bellevue's a dead end.
So what is the traffic count?
I can't quote the exact number, but I could provide it for you.
See, when you show this picture to the general public, you're showing no traffic. Why don't you show it during rush hour? That's what people want to get up and down Bellevue. I'm not going to argue with you on that, but I'm just saying that if you're trying to make your case, you really ought to show both images showing at rush hour so we can see what
I think
it looks
that's
like.
fair. I think that's fair. And that's a really good point. I will say when we get into the overall road section, when we look at this, we were able to achieve that with the width of the road we have now, with no eminent domain, nothing. To achieve detached sidewalks and achieve planted medians, albeit a skinnier, you don't have the 12-foot luxury lane, which is really unnecessary in this environment as it is. It would help slow traffic down, frankly. And you're right, maybe at 8 o'clock, and at 5 o'clock, but, the road needs to cater 24 hours a day, not just necessarily for 30 minutes in the morning and the afternoon. But I don't want to get sidetracked. We've got a lot to get through. I think it's a reasonable
One more
point.
note.
Yeah.
The right-of-ways of these streets are the same. The same number of traffic lanes, the same number of turn lanes. They're virtually identical in terms of their cross-section, with the only exception being, these extra zones at the end and slight widths of the lane. And you have to make a decision as a city whether you want to design a street for 2 hours of traffic at the highest volume, peak times of the day, automobile-centric, that's the primary driver of the street. And if that's the primary driver, then, who cares what the character of the street is? But when you start to get a street that has more amenities, you have to think about the total volume of the street and people. What if you could walk somewhere instead of having to get in your car? What if you could ride your bike instead of having to get in your car? What if you could break down the block structure so everybody's not forced onto the same road? The total volume of the street can increase. It can actually decrease traffic pressure by adding some of these other street amenities.
Yeah, and we'll look at it. We have a section that looks at that. And I think, so these are some questions that we would anticipate from the public. And I think, as exploring this as a city, what does that really mean and what are the implementations of that? It's a late night, guys. I've got a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. All right, so mobility and safety, right? It was detached sidewalks, place for cyclists, so they're not just, they're not bad, which is what we have now. Yeah, let's keep going, right? And then, so we're using one sort of from our own backyard, right? Existing character and desired character, and the existing character based off the use-based zoning that we have now are seas of parking lots and little boxes that sit in seas of parking lots. That's what we have now. That's what use-based zoning gets you. We'll get into that in a little bit. Now, Belmar, right, ground zero, I think they had an opportunity to start from scratch, but you can put a land use policy in place that over time, over the longevity of development and the cyclical nature of development, you end up with this, right? You wake up in 20 years and you have this. It doesn't have to happen overnight in some cases. So creating a mixed-use environment, which again is per the plan, it's not necessarily use-based. So in a use-based, or what we have now, is you get in your car and you drive to Taco Bell and then you go home or wherever, right? But here you're going to walk somewhere potentially to some outdoor recreation. You can go shopping and you can go to the, you can go somewhere to eat, have some coffees, maybe some live music, and then home. So these half-hour trips become 5-hour trips. And that's also how you decrease volume on the road, is that you're offering all these amenities in a much more centric fashion that it just keeps people more local. All right, so this is directly out of the plan. So, corridor plan, this was identified here, right? Opportunity area number 1 opportunity area number 2, which is not in urban renewal. So this is Centennial Square. And then obviously we have opportunity 4 here, Arapahoe Center, which is in urban renewal. And then on down the line. So this was all identified as opportunities. And I think there was a comment about how do we do these things with our neighboring cities. And I think you engage them as well. And that's just part of the process. It's just part of having these dialogues and communications about making these spaces better. But, you know, that was essentially identified as opportunity area 1, which is what your charge is, right? So this is some diagrams that talk about how we're dealing with development from the 1960s and how we are trying to, you know, turn back the clock, heal, right? So how we're going to heal cities. So when you look at this example, you see these islands of parking and buildings. This is what we have. You know, you go to Southwest Plaza. That's what you have all around there. All of these little buildings are identified within here as well. These big buildings, and talk about what are we going to do with the businesses? Well, the businesses stay, and then we infill around them, right? So all of these spaces, we're reconnecting the grid, and this whole thing becomes this network. You know, here's another. This is Southwest Plaza. Well, look what happens when you do, and they did this at Belmont, right? You reconnect the grid, and now, you know, you have opportunities to get from here to here. And let's hit the next one.
One of the things that you'll notice about this is this makes these sites that are formerly isolated easier to access for neighbors, which is really important because the neighbors are going to be the people that shop at these businesses. They're going to be the people that frequent these recreational areas. So it's important to give them a path that they can access these things easily.
Is part of that concept the creation of retail neighborhoods? Like a lot of the European cities have retail neighborhoods, so like even a Wash Park area has retail residential neighborhoods instead of the Southwest Plaza huge thing. Is that what you're trying to show them?
That's right, and in the plan it identifies neighborhood serving retail. That's what the community says they want, right?
Pedestrian friendly.
Pedestrian friendly. So these Southwest Plaza becomes, you know, there's multifamily in here, opportunity for different types of housing, different types of retail experiences. And you know, you start localizing where your parking is, and then you start bringing back all of these wonderful spaces that were there one time, and all these little parks and little niches and nodes that are essentially just paved over. And this also helps with your water quality, and it just goes on and on and on. But really it comes down to the neighborhood and connectivity.
One of the really important opportunities in this corridor is the fact that it has a lot of big box stores. And any plan that moves forward is not going to assume that those big box stores are eliminated, because they're very important to the tax base of this area. So a big part of the design challenge and the approach moving forward is how can future construction infill in a way that works with those big box stores and not against them. And I would argue that if there are other supporting businesses and industries around those big box stores, that would probably drive additional foot traffic through those big box stores. And I would argue that they would probably be amenable to this type of development if it was approached in the right way.
Yeah, and I think to the point of the super block, right? So the neighbors that live at the base of Arapahoe Hills right now, to get to Home Depot, why would you ever want to walk there, first of all? But you would have to go through, if when Centennial Square was there, this strip center, right? That doesn't feel like neighborhood, that doesn't feel like community, it doesn't feel walkable. You know, but imagine if you got, the grid was re-engaged and broke down to a pedestrian experience, and you were able to walk from Arapahoe Hills and walk all the way to the river through a neighborhood. Right now, you have to walk on that sidewalk we looked at, you know, and maybe try to meander through Centennial Golf Course. That's not how we want to engage the river, and that's not, you know, the things that make Littleton so wonderful are, you know, the Main Street and the river, and those are the things that we need to exploit as opportunities. And you know, Centennial Square is a gigantic super block.
May I ask a question?
Oh, yes, please.
And I don't want to get bogged down, truly.
Sure.
But I see all that, and then you talk about walking to Home Depot or whatever, and I like to walk, and I want my community, it doesn't look like that. But if I'm going to Home Depot, I'm going in my car. Sure. Because I can't carry what I'm going to buy
home most of the time. So when you talk about this kind of a design and pedestrian friendly, are there real studies that back up that can, I just don't see, we don't give up our cars.
So there's absolutely, in these designs, in these studies that are wildly successful, there's not a net reduction in parking. You're taking away the surface blight of parking and condensing it where it needs to be. So the parking where it needs to be near Home Depot, right? That's not going to go. People in their trucks and whatnot. That still exists, but it's all the other little spaces. If you think about behind Key Bank, you think about behind, what is it? It's a KFC, maybe, I think it is. That parking lot, there's signs that says you can't sleep in your car. What is that used for? It's nothing. So they're trying to prevent people from sleeping there. It's no different than the tent city at Centennial Square. So why is that? It's so inefficient. It's not used. Not even maybe twice a year at the holidays. But that is the opportunity to re-engage, and then you still have your parking for uses that need it. But
So what you're really saying is our parking requirements are way overstated for some.
Well, they're way overstated, and we would recommend them not being pushed right against the street. The parking that doesn't provide the opportunity for the street, doesn't provide the walkability. The comment about walking down and going from shop to shop to shop. All we have now is a big box and a sea of parking, and then a big box and a sea of parking. So if you go back to these diagrams, this is parking. There's a lot of parking here, and you can imagine that this is the Home Depot, right? I mean. It's the same thing. Parking. We're not going to get rid of our cars anytime soon. That's probably 50 to 100 years when it really starts ratcheting down. But even then, they're still going to be zipping around. You may just not need to park in them.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, if you get way out there, start to be discussions of it as car share becomes a more prevalent thing. If cars start self-driving, maybe you don't always have your car with you. Maybe your car drops you off and then it goes somewhere else, and you can do your business and then you get in it and go home. I mean, these are emerging issues that are probably too far out for us to project, but they're things that we should be mindful of moving forward.
Especially with when Jocelyn talked about, I know we're getting past 9 here, but the land use. What does land use mean? And when we get to the policy section, when you think about land use and form-based zoning, which we'll get to, it provides for that opportunity way down the road. So when cars are not, who knows what happens, right? But let's say that they're not as prevalent, half as many are on the roads. What are we going to do with all these parking spots, So how are we going to develop them? And we're not going to develop them in B2 zoning. It's just not going to work, right? So it has to be another strategy, and it has to be in place now while we're thinking about it. We've got the inertia and the council and everyone really invested in sort of creating a better street. This is the street section, and I know it's a little tough to see maybe from back there, but I know you have it in your packet there. But so this street section is essentially what we have in Bellevue. Okay, we've got parking. This is showing a little landscape buffer, which would be on the north side, and a sidewalk, and then 12-foot median, 12-foot, and then an attached sidewalk, and then a grass buffer, and then a building. In the same section, you can get 5-foot sidewalk, 5-foot tree lawn, a 5-foot safety raised bicycle lane, safety curb, street, then a planted median, street, and all of these things are existing in the same thing that we have in Bellevue. It's remarkable if you think about that for a minute. And I'm not saying that there aren't roads in Colorado that need to be designed like that, certainly. But a neighborhood that dead ends up a hill into Bomar doesn't need to be a high-speed traffic zone lane. It just doesn't need to be that, in my opinion. And per the plan, right? What you're looking at here is it's called the transect diagram, and if you can imagine Bellevue, okay, you can imagine this section of Bellevue, so you can imagine sort of Arapahoe Hills, and then as you come down, and then as you get closer to the river and sort of the more dense areas. This right here is a diagram that talks about the sort of necessary need for a variety of housing types. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, one of the most important and kind of continuously referenced findings of the plan is this need for a diversity of housing and how important that is for the community in this area. And you can see on this model the elements that are in white. In our neighborhoods, traditionally, we tend to go from single-family housing and then we make this huge jump into these mid-rise centers. But there are all of these housing forms and typologies that fit in between that serve a variety of functions for families of various sizes. They provide different levels of affordability, and they provide a lot of flexibility for the community. So part of the study of the implementation of this plan is what's the best way to incentivize these type of housing opportunities that fill those needs. So that moving forward, that's going to be something that's part of the discussion.
Yeah, and I think, jumping back to the conversation in the meeting, the developers of Centennial Square came to City Council with the proposal for 350 housing units. Columbine Square, excuse me, and they got blown out of the water. But what if you were to design a community that had 350 housing units that you didn't know it, and it blended nicely at the base of Arapahoe Hills, and it came up towards Federal, and there was retail amenities, and you left, some of the more local community shops like O'Toole's, and you planned around these things in a thoughtful way and created the connectivity. What if you did that? Would 350 units get blown out of the water? Would it provide some affordable housing that we need in the city? Just questions. So this one, and we brought Southwind, we tried to find some local examples. So Southwind does a lot of things right, but it does something very poorly, and it backs up to that residential neighborhood in the exact way that we think exactly, right? And so that's the opposite of what the transition from Arapahoe Hills needs to be. And you can imagine how that transect diagram needs to be considered as you sort of march towards the river. But it's still creating a variety of housing types along with retail amenity. You can imagine walking from Arapahoe Hills or down the hill. We could go to Bill Hopping's house for a beer and then walk down there and grab dinner. All right, so we put together a little animation. We're going to start on the west side of Bellevue. And then we're going to sort of fly down towards the river. And this is all just imaginary stuff based on the plan. And you can imagine, talking about community involvement, we could do dozens of these illustrations and talk to the people, and we can put people in these streets. We can put people from the community in the streets, and they can see what it looks like, what it feels like. It's not just poster boards with sticky notes, right? And that's just sort of the level of consideration that needs to happen.
And just because we're showing things in these images doesn't mean that we're necessarily proposing that what exactly is what we're showing is what's
over and over and over again.
There are so many ways that you can approach these issues. These are design strategies that have to be talked through at the community level. All of this stuff has got to be sorted out between CDOT and the city and the community and the property owners.
Denver.
These are things that have to be worked out, but you can't work them out if you don't start to look at them and think about how they hit the ground.
Without further ado, so we're going to highlight the opportunity areas based on the plan. You'll see at the beginning here the urban renewal zones. There's no music, Bill. Sorry.
Sing for us, Bill.
Yes.
You don't want that to happen.
So we've got, so this is Arapahoe, the Arapahoe shops, right? So imagine if, they just had 2 stories, right? They had ground floor retail, and you can imagine Walter's Pizza in the corner and maybe some residential above, right? But it's small, it's no different than the houses, but it creates the commercial incentive that it needs, but it anchors the corner. And as we go down, we've taken this section, the cross section, and added these planted medians, okay? And we're going to look at that a little more closely, but remember that image at the beginning of a street that was just pure asphalt, and start to think about it more like a neighborhood, right? We're going, watch out, head-on collision. So we're going to look at what an intersection looks like, okay, based on what we have to work with, right? So here's the intersection, no different. in terms of right-of-way. But, so we're showing a planted median, okay? Areas of refuge, shared crosswalks, okay? These are safety crosswalks and raised bike lanes, right? And then internal planning zone for the detached sidewalks. All of that is possible. And it's part of the infrastructure. Great infrastructure brings great development, right? If we want to court good developers, then we can't have crappy roads. We can't have just, we need to provide these things to bring in the grade A developments.
One of the things that we've talked about is the fact that development pattern follows infrastructure. So whenever you have a street that has no amenities, it makes sense for developers to develop in such a way that there's a sea of parking around their building because they're not anticipating any people being on the street. But if the street section has amenity, if there are people on the street, then developers have incentive to turn towards it and to create patterns that follow those traditional neighborhood formal arrangements. So whatever we do with the street cross section, if anything, it's going to be important to provide people an opportunity to be on the street if we want those businesses to turn back to it.
So we're sort of at the base of Arapahoe Hills here, and then we're going to come to Columbine Square, just right on the corner.
So what are the white boxes representing? And
Okay, fair. So for the sake of our 2.5 week putting this together, the white boxes are structures. So those are actual existing buildings. So if you want to back up just a minute.
okay, so they're the homes that are on Irving,
That's
or
right.
not, or west of Irving.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So those are all the homes that are on there right now.
Okay.
Exactly. And so thank you. Maybe I should have made that more clear. This is looking down. So Irving Street, so this is the base of Arapahoe Hills, essentially, and this is Columbine Square, okay? So it's how do you transition from the residential? So just based off of the plan, you have small, single-story, single-family residential, maybe duplex, very much in the sense of the single-family homes on Arapahoe Hills. And then perhaps going to 3 stories along Bellevue to help create that street wall. We'll get a little bit further down, but how do you blend that, right? How do we get that correct? Which is part of the discussion with the community. And what does that look like? What does that feel like? I mean, that's a person. It's, it's not that tall. But now you're imagining this all used to be parking lot. It all used to be back there in this rundown strip center. And so imagine if you create a new street and a new neighborhood. O'Toole's is down here, but what if you had this? What if you had these shops? What if you had this sidewalk? And that's possible. This is possible. To be able to walk down the street and come to a shop.
One of the things that is important to note about this view is that the right-of-way within Bellevue is very much something that has to be a negotiation. It's a state highway, right? CDOT controls it. So anything that happens with Bellevue is going to be a very much back and forth give and take with the city. And there's going to be, encouragement and push and pull on both sides. One of the unique opportunities with the Columbine Square area is as this area is redeveloping, there's opportunity to add new infrastructure. There's opportunity to create a desirable street section, a street section that's unlike anything that's anywhere else in the city. It's an opportunity for a fresh start in the same way that the Belmar images are. So what we're encouraging everyone is to start to think about is what could that infrastructure look like in such a way that it supports those businesses that want to be on there in that site in the best way possible.
We're now going to sort of fly up into space and just look at Columbine Square, really in terms of the connectivity of breaking down the superblock. So just think about how you reconnect the grid, how do you break it down, and then based on the plan, we can look at this a minute. We'll let it slow down. So O'Toole's, Arapahoe County election, what have you, which is part of the urban renewal, and those are parts of discussion of that, because there's opportunity there as well. But how do you reconnect the grid, right? How do you break it down? How do you create walkable paths from this neighborhood all the way through and over into this neighborhood, down to Centennial, down into the river? How do you get, you've got the residential single family, and then you get single family and sort of ramps up. And then here you get a little bit more commercial, where you've got commercial along the street, along Federal, which is called for in the plan, and then even more residential units above potentially. So you can have a whole blend of housing, condos, apartments, single family, along with, along with retail.
Yeah, the two primary things that the plan is prescriptive in regards to, that we're trying to reflect in this diagram, is the lack of east-west connectivity across the site, which was identified by the neighbors as a major area of concern. Because if you want to transition east or west across the site, you have to go all the way to the top or all the way to the bottom of that super block. So that's a problem if you're a neighbor trying to access the site. So what we've drawn in here are what we see as some possible logical places to create continuations of the grid. And, maybe these are the places, maybe there are other places. A couple of these are identified in the plan document, and we just kind of reproduce them. And others are things that we just added that we thought were logical additions. But this is all flexible as long as it achieves that goal.
So, yeah, but it's flexible to some degree, and I want to make sure that we're founded in reality, because these buildings are appropriate widths for retail, appropriate widths for commercial, appropriate widths for residential. So what would you do to a developer? Let's say, so the Columbine Square folks own all of this, and you're saying, all right, Mr. Developer, Miss Developer, we want to connect the grid per the adopted plan by City Council. We think, based on our area plan, that we want to connect the grid here. So we're going to build the grid. We're going to build this infrastructure as part of LIFT. That's part of the urban renewal. And the developer is going to say, okay, well, based on maybe a new policy shift, this land just got a hell of a lot more valuable. And now I'm going to sell this to a commercial developer, and this developer is going to build it per the plan, per the form-based zoning. I'm going to sell this. I want to build residential. That's what they do. So they're going to build this chunk of residential. They're going to sell this piece off, sell that piece off. Next thing you know, you've got a really nice blend and a fabric of community that's not just one development, but it's a handful of developments based on Brett's comment of the infrastructure and reconnecting the grid and having a plan in place. And so when you engage the city and engage the developers, it's like, look, we can do a yield on this. You can put 350 units on this, but you also get 100,000 square feet of retail. You get all these other things. And look at the opportunity you're getting if you work with us. You don't have to do a P4 and go to the city and get it rezoned. We're going to work with you, and we're going to create something that the city and the community wants. And we're going to provide this infrastructure to do this.
Having strong infrastructure in place provides predictability for the development market.
I'm curious about one thing.
Sure.
Has O'Toole's opined on that picture?
So, this right here?
Yes.
Say the question again. Is O'Toole's?
Have they opined on that picture?
I'm not familiar with the term opined.
Have they
Commented.
No, they haven't, unless they watched the video, but we haven't got a letter in the mail. But so here's the deal.
The reason I'm bringing that up is you'll never sell them, because you just took out a big chunk of their retail area.
So let me say, if we were going to work with the private community as a public entity, right? We say, okay, O'Toole's, there's wonderful shops, wonderful places in Rome. One of my favorites is the Campo dei Fiori, right? So what if you say, all right, O'Toole's, and O'Toole's may sell in 50 years. So what are we going to do with it, right? So we need to think about the future. But right now, what if we say, O'Toole's, yeah, all of this right here is your huge retail where you have all your trees. Well, why can't you put it here? Why can't you make it a park? Why can't you have people walking in and out of all this material that's changing all the time, and you have all these pine trees and whatnot?
If you owned a nursery, you wouldn't do that. I can guarantee you that.
So I'm here to just talk about just vision and possibilities. Okay? We're just talking about opportunities about connecting the grid. And O'Toole's, maybe the grid stops right here, and then O'Toole sells once the land value is such that it becomes advantageous for O'Toole's to sell, and then the grid gets reestablished.
Maybe we relocate the Arapahoe County voting thing to another location.
Absolutely, and that's part of that.
And let them, work that. They're pretty cooperative.
I think O'Toole's. Well, I think O'Toole's can be a really nice nice piece to the whole puzzle. I think it can be the square, it can be a round O'Toole's, we can embrace it, we can, bring it part of the community. I mean, all those things can be conversations.
O'Toole's is identified in the plan as an important cornerstone retail element of the community. So whatever plan happens, it has to take them into account. And it's really tempting when you see this image to just see it and think, oh no, that's a lot of development happening really quickly. But what you have to think about as part of this study is how does this phase in? This is possibly a 20 to 30 year development life cycle to get something that looks similar to this. So over time there's phasing and things can move and shift and you get pieces of the grid first, but you leave other areas open. Not all of these lots are going to infill immediately. So
A lot of people that own property there that aren't selling.
I think what's getting lost here is, with master planning, and I've been involved on the Auraria campus with two. One for the Auraria campus as a whole, and for Community College of Denver. And I was directly involved with the Community College of Denver. And you set up plans on, here's where we see where this is going. And by statute, we have to every 5 years revisit that and look at that. Because things change. Funding doesn't come through, enrollment changes. So it's a living document, but what it starts is, it starts the framework to say, this is the direction we want to see this go to. And I would venture to say that in 5-10 years, the city would go back to this and say, does this still fit? Has things changed in this area? Do we need to revisit this? Again, it's just giving a framework, and what these gentlemen are presenting to us is, what can this framework look like? It may, after they go, if they're engaged with the city council engages them to flesh this out in a full master plan on what they really envision this to look like in 5, 10, 15 years. What we may see a year from now is totally different than this. After they've engaged with the community, the businesses, the property owners, the vision could be vastly different. What this has done is just to say, is to try to garner excitement, garner interest, garner discussion on where do we want this to go. It's the next step with the envisioning project to start formulating how do we develop what the community said that they want in these areas.
That's all it is. That's exactly what it is. It's people that may want single-family housing there or nothing, a park, retirement center. I mean, we don't know. This is just exactly doing its purpose, to have these conversations with the various players and community, the folks that are involved.
Yeah, but you're trying to sell a concept here, and I agree with you.
He's not selling any concept. What he's saying, what the city asked, what the city,
what we're doing.
What the city has asked them to do is to look at the Bellevue corridor, start having a discussion on what that implementation would look like for us in this corridor. It's not what it will be or what the final, yes, this is what we want it to be. And then the city council would then decide whether to engage this firm to flesh this out in more concrete.
Yeah, it's to implement, to take this and then take the next step. But I mean, I want to be clear that this concept is literally, we didn't write this plan. This wasn't our work. We just read it.
Either.
We just.
But I agree. I actually
read it.
I think the way to think of it, if I understand correctly, what's important are the principles. Have we agreed as a city on the principles, such as walkable city, hide the parking, and we've all been to other communities that do that really well, where you can go to a big box store, but the big box store is here and the parking is hidden behind it, and the trees and stuff like that. Those principles, those are like building blocks. What it actually ends up looking like, God only knows. But the principles are the things, as long as the plan follows the principles, then you'll wind up, I would think, with something that's close to what you want. Well said. Yeah.
And urban renewal's role is not that.
Oh, no. We're being advised of it because we're, right.
Well, no, it could be.
Different.
I disagree with that. It can be. If the master plan comes out and says, we want these roads and they don't exist, we can help put those roads there. We can finance those roads. That is a role of urban renewal.
That is a possibility if the financials work.
Correct.
And I'm looking at the buildings and that kind of thing, not so much the infrastructure, Kevin. That, you know, there's property that is represented there that's not in the urban renewal, or the property owner is not interested in selling. And it's 20 years.
50.
Somebody, who knows?
Someone's, this
You know,
land is so valued,
but-
they're gonna.
So what we need to understand is when we're listening to this, what it is we should be paying attention to. Is it the infrastructure? Is it the density that's there? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's, and Brett, maybe you can jump in, but I really, it comes down to the infrastructure, and providing great infrastructure will just incentivize great development. And I think if it's all founded on the principles, which is what we're talking about, you know, that's what you get, right? I mean, Cherry Creek is not Littleton, but, you know, that used to be the city dump, right? I mean, look what it's become, and it's a different city, a different pocket than we have here, but, you know, they were able to put it together in such a way that people like to live there and walk around there, and it's not, but the infrastructure, right? I mean,
Yeah, this goes back to the idea of infrastructure as a tool for placemaking. You know, by controlling where the grid happens and by what shape it is and what depth it is, that has implications for future development. You know, this is not a type of grid that's going to allow for, you know, a huge big box store surrounded by parking. You know, it's possible that there might be a possibility that you could fit on one of these blocks a big box fronting the street with a parking lot behind, and maybe that's the form that it takes. But the infrastructure, as it goes in, starts to drive those development patterns. So that's a huge part of the discussion of what's going to happen on this site, is how that infrastructure develops, and you know, and that's going to be a back and forth with the property owners, with the lift board. But this is just a point of reference to start the conversation about those issues.
This is not a simple or short discussion.
oh, absolutely not.
Not at all.
No, I'm thinking, just thinking of all the different properties that are in there. And I understand what you're trying to create with infrastructure. And it makes sense. But, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's a long-term thing, but almost any time you go into a ground zero development where somebody has a piece of land, they start with the infrastructure. They start with the road layouts. They start with the concept. They essentially do this kind of thing, and then that is the magnet to, all we can do is provide an envelope, is the city.
Yeah, and
We've kind of done that downtown, you know, and we like some of the stuff that's happened. We don't like some of the others that have happened, but we've provided the envelope, and that's, I think, what we strive toward.
And if you're interested in what it starts to look like as you develop those infrastructure packages, we have some documents that we can share with you as if there's a next step in this process that involves the infrastructure, what does it look like? And we can share that with you, and you can, you know, start to see what that looks like in practice.
I'm seeing dollar signs.
We've worked on
similar
similar projects in the past.
I see Carol outside Home Depot waiting for the car to pick her up. Standing there with a 4x8 sheet of plywood on a windy day.
Her robot car is going to come get her plywood.
Yeah, and they say with robot cars, we're going to have more cars on the road.
Yeah, very, very, very true. We don't know what the future holds, right? This is part of the Bellevue study. I know it's getting late, but I mean, look at, right? And this is where everyone's sleeping in their car. You know, what if, so this is opportunity area 2, what if Centennial Square, you know, instead of parking on the street, had a building and a walkable street edge? And same here, all the opportunity that Riverside Downs didn't utilize. I mean, they just didn't exploit the river. It's a parking lot to the river. Imagine if the bike shop was on the river and all the bikes going by there and all the bikes outside. So there's all this infill based on those diagrams that's still there. And this is obviously out of LIFT's jurisdiction, but, you know, if the city through policy would allow, you know, where something isn't based on FAR and based on form, it provides more opportunity for the developer and more opportunity for businesses and so forth. So just quickly, I know we're at the end of here, but, and this really doesn't necessarily involve lift per se, but Littleton's historic approach to land use is the existing zoning, single applications, so PDOs or PDs, administrative review, and there's no consistency because what happens is you get blah, 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 blah all over the place. And so same thing right now with Columbine Square. You get them come in here to get a rezone or the P4 to get it rezoned and they do their thing and then O'Toole's does sell and they do their thing and then Rapo goes away and, you know, and so what if you did think about it and you planned the whole thing out for the long term, right? And that's what this is, comprehensive plan, land use map, transportation, adoption of new zoning map, and then no need for planned development overlays because you've already planned it. You've already planned it. It's not just use base. So this is basically Littleton's code for B2. This is all that governs B2. This is what Centennial Square went in on. This is it. And so what it is, it's an FAR, right? So an FAR is a floor to area ratio, so that's what's guiding it. So you can have an FAR 2:1, so your building can be twice as big as your zone lot, and so you can get these shapes, and often you get shapes like this with parking. In a form-based, you talk about where you want the buildings built to requirements, to the street, you want transparency, what are the shapes, what do we want to see, how does all these things engage with the community, and it just gives the designer just more tools, and it gives the community more tools on what we want to see. So when you look at Centennial Square, it's like, what do we want? What does the community end up wanting? Well, they don't want to tell the developer this, and the developer doesn't want to really want that. The community wants to come together with this, and then the developer can build those buildings. And so over the life cycle, over the 50-year life cycle of that development, the whole plan will be fulfilled based on form-based zoning.
Yeah, so this is the second half of the equation of how do you implement the plan. The first half is infrastructure, but the second half is how you approach the regulatory structure in the city. Because based on this FAR condition that exists in the current regulatory structure, there's nothing that would incentivize the type of development pattern that this plan prescribes. So part of this, in addition to the infrastructure, is looking at it from a policy side and saying, how do we adapt our policy to be, you know, constructive to the goals of these plan documents that we're producing? Because if we don't think about how those can be modified, then, you know, we're never going to achieve those plans.
Right. So this is a really good point about the big box store. We're going to close on this, but this is use-based zoning. This is what we have in Littleton down Bellevue. This is in Florida, as in Miami.
Yeah.
But this is just a target use-based zoning. And it's on the corner, it's on the street, they've got retail or residential above, retail below. The target is actually here in the middle, and the parking is in the back, sort of wrapped around it. So you can imagine in the same scenario, and this is just 3 stories, and maybe, you know, Littleton is a different feel, it's a different vibe, but the point is that, you know, apart from these little beams coming out, I mean, it's just it could be anything. It's King Soopers, it's whatever.
A use-based zoning prescribes an FAR and gives a use for that site. A form-based zoning starts to draw the box of how that building fronts the street, how that mass of the building feels, and then it allows all kinds of development to happen inside it. Mix of uses, you know, synergistic office, retail, residential, restaurant, you know, there can be a lot of overlap and a lot of flexibility. So developers kind of like form-based zoning because it allows a greater range of possibilities in terms of who they can lease the buildings to.
So I know it was a lot, everybody. Thank you. It's 9:30.
Thank you.
But,
Appreciate it. It's fantastic. Thank you, guys. That's very thought-provoking.
Would they do one of these for Broadway?
Thanks, everybody.
I don't know that they've done it, but I think